In a world where voices are silenced,
Please.
one man refuses to lie down.
It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
He's been punted not once,
40 years they've been trying.
not twice,
You couldn't fire somebody if they were horrible, doing a terrible job.
but 3 times.
You're fired.
He doesn't tell you what to think, but gives you something to think about. Welcome to the Bonafide podcast with Luke Boner. And he's not
All right, here we go.
done
Hold your ears, folks.
yet.
It's showtime.
Well, g'day and welcome, folks, to episode, what is it, Kelsey? Episode what? 31. And they said we wouldn't last 2. Look, we're going to save the voice messages for the next podcast because we have a hell of a lot to get through today. Coming up, World Affairs with Dr. Keith Suter. Truckee Tuesday, and we'll talk with the king of the road, Rocket Rod Hanafi. That's coming up. And a very special guest. You do not want to move from your headphones. Do I assume you all got headphones? I think I can assume that. Keith Banks, one of Queensland's most decorated police officers, author of books including Gun to the Head, Drugs, Guns and Lies, and you'll discover what life is like as an undercover police officer. It is fascinating. He is fascinating. It's raw and it's all true. Shout out to one of our great listeners, Andrew, who suggested to us that we talk to Keith Banks. Andrew, can't thank you enough because it is such an amazing chat. All that and a whole lot more coming up on another exciting episode of Bonafide with Boner and the Millennial. Coming up, World Affairs with Dr. Keith Suter. Well, this week, like any other week, the tensions around the world are growing, especially in the Middle East. With his latest look at what's going on and how it affects us here in Australia is international affairs expert Dr. Keith Suter, who joins us again on Bonafide with me, Luke Boner. Dr. Keith, welcome aboard once again.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, where do we start? Have we seen, or are we close to the end of the Israel-Iran conflict?
No, we're not. I think what we've got is this temporary ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Donald Trump clearly angry with both countries and banging their heads together, so to speak. And yet there's always a risk that that ceasefire will break down. And of course, the flashpoint for all of this is Iran's acquisition of nuclear weapons, or suspected acquisition. The Americans carried out a bombing raid to destroy the nuclear facilities that Iran had built inside a mountain, which the Israelis could not destroy with their own equipment, and so required this remarkable use of the B-2 bomber fleet that the Americans have got, dropping what are called the bunker buster bombs. They fell on the nuclear sites. There were 3 of them in Iran. 2 of them were attacked by the bunker busters, the 3rd one by missiles from an American submarine. President Trump declared that as completely obliterating the Iranian nuclear facilities. But we've now had skepticism about how effective the raid was. There's been a leaked intelligence report from the United States suggesting, in fact, that it was not a complete obliteration and that Iran could soon start getting back into the business of building nuclear materials. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the United Nations watchdog, has also recently said that it thinks that Iran could get back into the business of building weapons. Now, Donald Trump has said, well, he's happy to bomb the Iranians again if they do this. So there is some question mark as to how effective the American bombing raid was and to what extent Iran is going to give up on its nuclear ambitions. The Iranians will say they were never intending to build nuclear weapons. But of course, a lot of other people are very suspicious that in fact they might be trying to do that. So I think that what we've got at the moment is a temporary lull. The Israelis have obviously got to replenish their own supplies of material, and Iran has got to replenish its own supplies before we have the next round. Remember, this is an issue that's gone on for over half a century. It was the Shah of Iran, the previous ruler of Iran, who had in mind buying nuclear material. In fact, he was going to buy the uranium from Australia. So we almost ended up supplying them with the uranium. So this has been a half a century long project, and I think it'll still continue to be a campaign by Iran to acquire nuclear weapons.
Did Donald Trump deliberately lie, not only to the American people, but the people of the world, when he said the bombing was a great success and that was the end of Iran's capability to proliferate nuclear weapons?
I think that Trump has a problem that he over-eggs the pudding, to use an English saying, that he takes a basic fact but then exaggerates it. Clearly, it was technically a very successful operation that the Americans carried out. Flawless, really. The extent to which it was completely obliterated, which is the American phrase, we just don't know. And he wouldn't have known at the time, and we still don't know even this day the extent to which the damage has been done. The Iranians are saying that they didn't sustain much damage, and in effect are actually inviting Trump to go back and do it again by that sort of stupid comment from the Iranians. The Iranians should keep their mouths shut.
Yes.
So it's a bizarre situation in which we're living.
It really is bizarre. And if we could just stay in the Middle East for a second, over the weekend, a few days ago now, by the time this podcast drops, we saw thousands of Israelis in Tel Aviv protesting the fact that Israel is still waiting for hostages. I mean, I understand about 50 hostages remain with Hamas. Why is it taking so long, Dr. Keith?
Well, because the Israeli Prime Minister is focused on other matters. He claims that he wants to get those hostages released. Hamas are saying, yes, we're happy to release them, but the Israelis will need to withdraw their forces from Gaza, and he will not do that. So he wants to keep the war going in the hope that he will be able to destroy Hamas. So he wants to keep the war going. But as you say, many Israelis just want the war to stop. Of the 50 that we're talking about half are dead. But it may well be that there are still 20 or 25 who are still alive and living in those tunnels under Gaza. And so their next of kin want them back home. But Israel would then need to come to a deal with Hamas, whereby Israel agrees to withdraw from occupying Gaza.
If we could go now back again to the United States, as we all know, about 90 days ago, Trump shocked the world when he announced his so-called reciprocal tariffs on more than 180 countries and territories, designed to punish foreign nations who ran trade deficits with the United States. It turns out now, and it's what we all expected, and it's what every economist told me, Dr. Keith Suter, that these tariffs would ultimately harm Americans.
Exactly. So a tariff is an import tax applied to goods coming into the country, and the tax is paid for by the people living in that country. So in the lead up to the imposition of the tariffs, Trump kept saying, the Chinese are going to pay it. No, they won't. It'll be Americans who are going to pay it. So as you import something from China, so you end up with the problem of China being pushed out of the American market because the goods are so expensive. And if you do want to go ahead and buy those Chinese products, you're going to have to pay more money. And that money will then go into the US government coffers. Now, in the early days of the United States, that's how the United States government finances itself. It's the same in Britain. You know, we have all these stories from a couple of hundred years ago of smugglers operating on the south coast of England wanting to bring in brandy, etc., from overseas. They were smuggling and they were getting around the tariffs that the British government had imposed on alcohol coming in from overseas or tobacco, so that if you were a smuggler, you got to bring the stuff in without paying the tariffs, and you could then sell it at a reduced price. So what we're seeing in the United States is a return to thinking which is 200 years old. The problem is that the American government, or the British government for that matter, is now just so large, you can't finance it just on import tariffs alone. You've got all this aged care, childcare, defence forces, etc. You can't finance them that way by tariffs. And so tariffs has become really a very old-fashioned way. And in fact, anything since World War II, the movement has been towards reducing tariffs to encouraging the development of free trade. Free trade means that it's trade that is free of tariffs.
Yeah.
So that has been the global move. And the Americans, or at least under Donald Trump, are trying to put the clock back. I just don't think it's going to work. And it's causing mayhem in the United States because people are saying, well, we don't know what we ought to be importing, how much it's going to cost us. There's no consistency in Trump's statements about tariffs. And so he's really damaging the economic prospects of the United States.
And of course, when you do have high tariffs on goods that are much needed by large members of the public, it leads to a black market, doesn't it? Look at what's happened.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at what's happened here in Australia with our tobacco tariffs.
Exactly.
And illegal cigarettes are going gangbusters.
Yeah, exactly it. So it's not, the general view of most economists is that tariffs are a bad idea. But Donald Trump, as it's interesting, he always gets accused of being inconsistent in his political views. But on one thing he has been consistent for the last 40 years is the need for tariffs. And he's being so heavily criticized by the economics profession.
He went to the election saying that this would happen. He's been saying it for a long, long time. And so I guess you get what you vote for.
Exactly. And I think ordinary Americans just don't understand what tariffs are all about. They're beginning to learn now because they're having to pay more. And there's going to be an increased rate of inflation, which means the US Federal Reserve will increase interest rates to try to dampen that down. And that might flow through to Australia because Australians might have to end up paying more because of the interest rates increased by the Australian Federal Reserve.
Now, you've said to me many times over the years that you don't believe that necessarily politicians should be diplomats. It should be a specialist job for a specialist person, not necessarily a politician that's moved into being in a position of diplomacy. I'm talking about ambassadors, etc. So what have we got to do to get Donald Trump on side? I am surprised at his attitude towards trade with Australia because we're supposed to be friends.
We're supposed to be friends, and also we're not a problem. China is the problem because the Chinese sell more to America than the Americans buy from China. So there is a trade deficit. We're in a trade surplus. From the American point of view, we are great customers. We buy a lot of American stuff. We are not a problem for America. And when this was put to the trade representative, they said, oh, well, what we're doing is simply driving the score higher. So then, in effect, they were admitting that we're not a problem. And so it's really damaging, I think, America's relationships with Australia. There's a lot of anti-American antagonism that I'm coming across now, which will flow over into the debate over AUKUS, etc. And so Trump, in his America First approach, is actually damaging the standing with his old allies.
So let's get back to diplomacy. Do we need someone else to try and talk to him? And I'm not being silly, but Greg Norman. Trump loves him.
Absolutely. Now, Greg Norman would be a good idea because that's exactly on Trump's wavelength. A sporting personality, very well known.
And a businessman.
Now, whether he'd want to get him involved in this sort of thing is another matter. But yes, he would be an ideal person. At the moment, we're relying on the foreign minister. She's going to be meeting with Trump's colleagues in the next few days.
Do you think Penny Wong will break ground where Kevin couldn't?
I think so. Well, Kevin is a political hack, as she is, of course, as well. I think your idea of Greg Norman is a much better one.
You want me
if
to
you've got him on your speed dial, you might get in touch with him, make him see if he wants to get involved.
Well, I can give him a ring if you want.
Yeah, why don't you?
Hey, tell me about the Trump's big budget bill.
Well, this is the other big headache for the president. So this is what is actually called the Big Beautiful Bill. It's a bill in the sense that it goes in as a draft law, and then when it's passed by Congress, it becomes an act. So it's a bill which then eventually becomes an act. And so this is the budget that President Trump wants Congress to agree to very quickly. He's put down the deadline of July 4, which, of course, is Independence Day in the United States, a public holiday. Trump's problem in particular is that the Department of Homeland Security, which is responsible for rounding up these alleged illegal migrants, has really spent big, as Trump foreshadowed in the election campaign, spent big in terms of agents that have been employed, the creation of centres to hold people prior to their being deported. So they're going well over their budget. And so Trump needs to get this big, beautiful bill pushed through Congress in order to enable this work to continue. The problem is this big, beautiful bill also contains huge tax cuts for the very rich in the United States, and they were going to be partly financed by cuts to health care. So you've got at least two Republicans, one of whom has now said he's not going to even bother to run again, who are just saying, look, this is going to cause us electoral problems. You're going to be punishing the poor and you're rewarding the super rich. And remember, people are very much aware of what's been going on in Venice with the with the Bezos wedding, etc. Rubbing people's noses in the wealth of these super rich people. So it's interesting, I find, that the United States is also running up increasingly a debt crisis. So the United States, since the early 2000s, has actually gone deeper and deeper into debt. Now, the Trump reply would be, well, if you allow us to have these tax cuts, the very rich will work harder and they will then trade us out of this deficit.
That's what.
And others are saying, no, that just doesn't work because, okay, you're thinking the money will just trickle down, but instead the tax cuts will go to overseas bank accounts, etc. It's not going to be spent in the United States. So it's not going to be a big boost to the American economy.
Yeah, I've actually spoken about that with Shane Oliver, one of our...
Oh, right.
Yeah, because Joe Biden said he does not believe in trickle economics, and I asked Shane Oliver, and it's exactly what you just said. You give tax breaks to the super wealthy and the big business end of town, with the expectation then that they will grow, employ more people, and then those people will then become taxpayers and put money back into the economy. There's absolutely no guarantee that that'll happen.
Exactly. But of course, if you're a super rich person, it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. This month, Donald Trump delayed for a third time the enforcement of a law mandating TikTok sale. He now says he's got a buyer for TikTok. He said he has a group of very wealthy people willing to acquire the platform. He said, I'll tell you in a couple of weeks. The sale would need approval from the Chinese government, but Trump told Fox News over the weekend he thought President Xi Jinping will probably do it. He's got buyers for TikTok.
Well, we have to wait and see. If you remember, Trump was originally very much opposed to TikTok because he said, look, it's got its close links with the Chinese government, and the Chinese government will use TikTok to influence Americans. So that was the original Trump position. And then at the recent election, Trump did very well on TikTok. It was a way of reaching younger Americans who are not terribly involved in politics. So suddenly his attitude towards TikTok changed. Now, by the time that his own conversion took place, the US Congress had followed the original view of Donald Trump and said that TikTok will need to be sold off to either an American company or banned from the United States. So Congress was doing what Trump originally asked them to do, and now suddenly Trump is saying, no, I've changed my mind, and I want you now to allow TikTok to continue, but it'll be under an American ownership. Now, maybe the Chinese might agree to that. They will still be able to get access to their equipment, my guess is. They may well agree to it. But it also shows the volatility of Donald Trump's views, that Donald Trump had one point of view, his supporters in Congress said, all right, we'll implement it. They implemented it, and Trump says, no, I've changed my mind. Makes it very difficult if you're a member of Congress to work out exactly what Donald Trump would like you to do for the long term.
Well, we know how much he loves social media. In fact, he's the only president I can remember that makes serious policies on social media.
Absolutely. And it's worked for him. You know, he loves connected. These young men are unmarried, uneducated, living in their parents' basement, and he's able to connect with them. It's a very good campaign that he has waged, and that helped push him over the line last November. So, yes, he's brilliant at the use of social media as a way of reaching people in a way that the Democrats were too snobbish to do so.
Always something going on, Dr. Keith Suter. Always good to talk to you. Thank you for keeping us in your loop.
Thank you.
I'll see you at Channel 7 Sunrise on the weekend, okay?
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke.
Good on you. There he is, international affairs expert, Dr. Keith Suter. Coming up, former undercover cop Keith Banks. So finally we meet Keith Banks. Welcome to the Bonafide podcast with me, Luke Boner. Lovely to meet you. I feel as though I know you very, very well.
Good morning, Luke. And mate, really appreciate the opportunity and invitation. So yeah, great to chat and thank you.
I have, through the course of my career, spoken to many policemen. Mark Ainsworth has already been on this podcast.
Yep, I know Mark.
You're a fascinating character.
Yeah.
Also, I have a neighbour who is retired detective who was around the Roger Rogerson era. He was based at King's Cross in the late 70s. He's retired. He is suffering unbelievable PTSD. He finds it very hard to relate and lead a normal life, even though he's retired. The amount of help that was on tap back in those days was non-existent.
Yep.
And he told me over a couple of beers one day that police officers didn't have the support that they deserved and saw terrible, terrible things. And so what they did was they congregated together, formed their own club, and often that involved consuming a lot of alcohol, which wasn't healthy.
Copious amounts of alcohol, mate. And you know, as you know, Luke, I'm a passionate advocate for the mental health conversation. Back in the day, the culture of policing was that we were all apparently tough guys. You had to be tough. If you showed any weakness in that organisation, I won't say you were shunned, but you certainly wouldn't be accepted as readily as if you were the strong type, if that all makes sense. So from a traumatic perspective, you know, and cops see things, and it was the same then, it's been the same back in the days of the Roman centurions, I suppose, but and it's still the same now. Police see things that normal people don't. And they see the inhumanity of man to man, and there are some dark things that people do to each other. So that all builds, that trauma experience builds and builds. And the way that we, and I was one of them, used to cope with it in the old days was just to get hammered. You know, and there was an old saying, we didn't drink to be social, we drank for effect. And that then created its own problems and its own cultural issues, its own mental health challenges as well. And, you know, one of the big things that police probably don't do now, and I'm not suggesting the alcohol was the right thing to do, but I think what they don't do now is they don't take the time to decompress with each other before they go home. It's almost, you know, you sign your firearm and do whatever you got to do, get changed out of your uniform, and you're in your car and gone. And
not wanting to appear weak.
Yeah, that's still part of it. Yep. It's getting better. You know, the culture is changing. I think it's just a natural consequence of younger generations coming into a job that's still pretty tough. And I think, you know, people from a younger generation now, because our daughters are 29 and 27, and they are more open emotionally, and they are more vulnerable. And they choose that than we ever were. So, you know, maybe that's an incremental change, one would hope.
But when you talk about the age of your children and you think about, you entered the police force in 1975, but I think you were about 22 when you went undercover. And I know that you talk a lot about three tiers of policing. One is obviously being in uniform, addressing an issue, going to a house, making an arrest, or the detectives doing the background work, getting people before a court, getting all the accolades when they get a conviction. But then there's undercover policing, which is another thing altogether. And you talk about the lack of welfare for police officers. I think there's maybe not so much today, but a lack of welfare for anyone that's a first responder, for example. Imagine what paramedics and fireys have to go through on a day-to-day basis. But I want to talk about your incredible books and your incredible life. And you talk about consuming copious amounts of alcohol. You were a fitness fanatic, a martial arts expert, I think a first dan in karate, and very, very fit, very aware of health issues. And next thing you know, on one occasion, you were to help get a conviction and to help gain the trust of a dealer, you were forced to do a line of speed.
Yep.
You had to do it to keep your cover.
Well,
that must have been amazing.
Also, the fact, Luke, that there was a double-barreled shotgun pointed at me across a table, and
so tell us this story.
Well, I guess go back a step. Yeah, you're right. I trained a lot in those days, and I joined the academy the year I turned 17. So I was a schoolboy essentially. I did year 12 in the academy, and then another 12 months of training after that under the cadetship, which doesn't exist anymore. So then I was sworn in. I was from the country. I was incredibly naive. I was never exposed to the drug scene. I didn't drink, never smoked a cigarette, etc. And I trained in Taekwondo, actually. Started karate in the academy, switched Taekwondo. It's a martial art thing. And I was training. I actually did my first dan black belt when I was still undercover. And the people I trained with, I had told that I'd been fired from the police force for drug issues. So I'd lied to them, for the entire time I was undercover. And I trained with them while I was in Brisbane, in between operations that often send us outside. And we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But on this particular occasion, I was doing an operation in Brisbane. It was one of the first ones I had done, so I was still learning as I went along. And in those days, there was no, it's not like the movies, there was no backup following me. I wasn't wearing a listening device. And just like the other 3 or 4 undercover guys, and we're all men, there were no women in those days, we were simply living in a world with no support. So sometimes we were carrying a gun, sometimes we weren't. And we just went out and scored drugs, then recorded all of that, brought the evidence back at the right time, and people would be arrested. So in this occasion, I was at the then infamous Royal Exchange Hotel in Brisbane, which is now a lot more sedate, one would hope. And it was pretty much a drug mecca. So I met a guy, as you do, in a pub, excuse me, and and we arranged for me to buy some speed from him, and I was buying from a lot of people, so I didn't see this as anything out of the ordinary. And we arranged to meet at a little place he had in Auchenflower in Brisbane. In those days, a bit squalid. These days, multi-million-dollar properties.
Yeah, it's very upmarket now.
Yeah. And in hindsight, gee, I wish I'd only bought sort of houses for $5,000 in those days. Anyway, so I went and knocked on the door. You just got to picture it. Yeah, never used drugs in my life. I'd started smoking a little bit of weed with targets when I had to, and even that was, for me, difficult to reconcile with my fitness approach. But I just decided, hey, I've got to do it. So went inside, said, yeah, we met today, the usual story. Here's the money. I want a couple of bags as a sample. And he said, sure, we'll do a line. And I just rolled out my usual excuse, which was, I don't use the shit. I'm in it for the money.
To me, it's a business. I don't touch
absolutely, yeah. And I continued with that all through my undercover career. Unfortunately, as you've read, a friend of mine started using heroin and had developed an addiction, and his life went badly.
Is this Harry Shehab?
Harry Shehab, yeah. Harry's real name. When I wrote the book, I rang Harry, or I contacted him. I re-established contact with him through the death of a friend of ours. And I said, look, mate, I've written our story. Finally, I'm changing your name, but I just want to let you know I'm writing about what happened to you. And his immediate response was, use my name, mate. Use my name. Everyone in my network knows it. I've reinvented myself, and, et cetera. So at any rate, sitting there, back to the dealer, sitting there at the table, and I rolled out the usual, don't use the shit, I'm in it for the money. And he produced a double-barreled sawn-off shotgun. from under the table and put it on the table and cocked both hammers back.
Sawn off.
Yeah, commonly called a coach gun in police parlance and underworld parlance. And I still, and let me tell you, when you look down the wrong end of one of those things, they look like a howitzer. And
wow.
And he said, either you do a line with me or I'll shoot you. His exact words were, blow your chest out or blow your guts out or something. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, you know, I've got no support, no backup. I'm all alone. So I just looked at him and said, okay, you got a straw. So, so I snorted speed off this. I'd never used it in my life. Snorted speed off this filthy, bloody, I don't know, plastic table. Then gave him the money, did the transaction, left, and then I was driving back to where I was living and just speeding off my nut and thinking, Jesus Christ, you know, what's happening to me? I hope I'm not going to die.
Wow. And of course, that's not the only time you had a gun pointed at you. You actually had a detective put a gun in your mouth.
Yeah.
Tell us this story.
Well, we were, it was after the operation where I did the speed, and it was the first operation that I was sent to outside the metro area. So I guess to give it some context, mate, there were no training courses in those days.
Right.
You were simply...
You were just thrown in.
You were thrown in, yeah. I volunteered for it. I thought it was a noble thing to do. And I wanted to change the world. I wanted to do something to fight the heroin trade. And I have to be honest, you know, part of the motivation was having come from 2 years in the academy and then almost 3 years on the road in uniform, where you had haircut regulations and, you know, all sorts of things. The concept of working undercover and being able to dress how I liked, wear my hair how I liked, grow a beard, put an earring and all of that stuff, as a 22-year-old kid was pretty attractive. So, you know, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. But so we're sent to Townsville on an operation. And in those days, we used our own cars and claimed mileage, and, you know, it was pretty Wild West. And I think about 3 hours outside Townsville on the Pacific Highway, I hit a pothole and blew a shock absorber. So, and on this occasion, I had a colleague with me, an undercover colleague. So anyway, drove in, dropped the car off after we'd cleaned it out, or so I thought, because we had a few guns. We had a shotgun each, I think, from memory, because in those days, everybody had guns. For all those young listeners, long before the firearms regulations were tightened, you could walk into a Kmart and you could buy a pump-action shotgun or a 223 semi-automatic rifle with 30 rounds.
High-powered rifle?
High-powered rifles, yeah. So I thought I'd cleaned everything out, and I inadvertently left a box of 38 hollow point ammunition under the spare wheel.
Oh.
And anyway, I went to pick the car up after it had been repaired, and John and I looked like pretty bad guys. You know, I'd grown a big black beard and I had my hair down to my shoulders by that stage, or almost to my shoulders. And again, to put it in context, in the 80s, police weren't allowed to grow beards. You had to have a medical certificate, etc. So, and pretty much everybody, and you'd remember, Luke, from those days, pretty much everybody had beards or goatees or long hair. And if you looked that way, you certainly weren't a cop, or you weren't in the armed services.
Possibly a porn star.
If you look on my website, I've got an embarrassing photograph, or in my book.
I've seen it.
With that big mustache.
But please keep going. So the car's gone in for a service, and you've left a box of ammo in the back under the spare wheel.
Yeah, and I found out later that the guy who owned the garage was actually worked not with the police, but certainly gave them information. He was very friendly with the police. He contacted them to say that there were a couple of desperados that had dropped off a car, and there was a box of ammunition, revolver ammunition or pistol ammunition. So he contacted them, and there'd been a death threat against a detective. So all of the perfect storm, and the detectives put two and two together and got five and thought that we were hitmen. So John and I had a unit, or a flat, I'll call it a unit, I suppose, in West Townsville. So I was on the balcony looking out, you know, contemplating the world. And I saw three CIB cars, so obvious police cars in those days, pull up in front of the driveway. And I said to John, Jesus, the Ds are here, the Jacks are here. And I said, wow, they're getting out of the car and they've got guns in their hands. Something must be on. And then I said, Jesus, they're running up here. So then they bashed on the door, and I went to open it, and the first detective pushed me against the wall and put his .38 in my mouth.
Jesus.
And I remember thinking, you know, when stuff goes badly, I thought, I saw where his finger was. It was on the trigger, and I thought, gee, I hope his firearm skills are up to, or his trigger discipline is up to scratch. As we put it politely in the old days, he interviewed me soundly around the head and shoulders. You know, in other words, he gave me a bit of a smack, and as you would, and demanded the keys to the car, etc. And that's when my colleague was in another room being soundly interviewed by another detective.
Vigorously interviewed.
Vigorously interviewed, yeah. And that's when he said, "That's it, that's enough, we're drug squad." And then the usual response was, "That's bullshit." So, you know, there was only one person in Townsville who knew we were there, and that was the detective senior sergeant. So then a couple of phone calls were made, and then they removed us from the unit. And they took us out, not in handcuffs. You didn't handcuff everyone in those days, but they certainly dragged us out to the cars to have everybody who was looking on feel that we were baddies and that we're being dragged away, which became beneficial later.
Yeah, it helped. It helped with your undercover persona.
I would rather it hadn't been. It hadn't developed that way, but Ferret, that was his nickname, the detective, and I became very, very good friends, and we're still very good friends now, and we used to laugh about it.
So just going back a bit, so you're 22, and you have been a police officer for a while.
About 3 years, yeah.
3 years. And you can wear what you want. You can look like what you want. Your hours, you probably get up at 11 o'clock in the morning. And
in time to watch the, I think it was the 11 a.m. Was it 11 a.m. back in those days, the news?
The 11 a.m.
There you go.
11 a.m. on Channel 7.
Yeah, that's the one.
And then, of course, your real work was probably done after dark in pubs and beer gardens.
Yeah, it depended. Yeah, sometimes during the day, often during the day. And the old story, mate, you know, the pub is where you'll make a lot of contacts for everything from, buying a gun to stolen property to drugs to, you know, anything really.
Because Roger Rogerson, for all his faults, I mean, he was the crooked cop that we often talk about.
Yeah.
But he actually said something that was true, and that was, if you want to infiltrate the Crims, you've got to be one. You've got to befriend them so that you know what's going on. I know that you say that being an undercover copper, just bearing in mind, folks, he's 22. He's got kids who are 27 now.
Yeah.
You're 22. The adrenaline, it must have been something that you could get hooked on. But the other thing is, you have got to be an Academy Award-winning actor. And I know that you say, if an actor gets a bad review, their feelings are a bit hurt. You get a bad review, and you could cop a baseball bat across your head. Precisely
right. Yeah, that's a favourite saying I've been using for a long time to try and explain to people what the world was like. And you're right, you have to. So my great friend Larry, who was another undercover colleague, he used to say it was like NIDA on steroids.
NIDA on
steroids, yeah. And some crooks were convinced that undercovers had gone through NIDA, you know, and because we were such good actors. And you know, there's a couple of things you've touched on, mate, and one is the adrenaline. Absolutely, the rush is like nothing else. You know, so another great friend of mine, Chuck, who featured in a documentary that Channel 9 did on me a little while ago. Chuck said the best descriptor he's ever used for undercover is, think about the most scared you've ever been in your life. You know, whether it's being, I don't know, jumping out of an airplane to do skydiving or a massive roller coaster or swimming with the sharks. The most scared you've ever been. Now do that 3 times a week for 2 years. That's what working undercover is like. And it is bloody frightening, particularly in those days with, as I say, no backup, to spend your time in bikie clubhouses or, you know, drug dealers' houses or pubs surrounded by the enemy. But it's also very addictive.
Yes.
And that's the paradox.
I can imagine.
That's the paradox.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
But you must have also had some fights with your conscience, because you talk about, you just said, you know, you're surrounded by the bad guys. But some of those bad guys were quite likable.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's someone that you probably go and have a beer with, and then ultimately you are going to betray them.
That's exactly right. That's the thing about working undercover, and every single undercover I've ever spoken to, and I include ex-undercovers from around Australia, New Zealand, and a couple in the USA, and one in particular who was ex-Scotland Yard, who I worked with in my corporate career later. Every single undercover says that's the most challenging part, is that you're making human connection, knowing full well that you will betray them at some point in that relationship. Mm. And a lot of operators don't lose touch with reality, but the lines blur very, very much. Mm. And in those days, if you think back to the corrupt era of the Queensland Police, and I'll qualify that by saying the vast majority of men and women I knew were totally honest and straight people, but there was a cohort of corruption in Queensland in those days. The commissioner went to jail for corruption after a royal commission, so that indicates to listeners what it was like. And dealing or mixing with drug dealers, some of whom I did quite like. And then there were some detectives in the drug area who were clearly corrupt, manipulative, people. I found myself preferring the company of some drug dealers to that of some police. So then you combine all of that, walking on eggshells, hypervigilance, being careful who we spoke to within the police force, and then working undercover, portraying yourself as a drug dealer in that transactional world and forming relationships. I used to think that I'd walked away after 2 years of undercover pretty much unscathed, but it's only later in life when I've analysed it, it changed me in many, many, many ways.
It had to.
Some for the better, some for the worse.
We're going to get to that really important point a little bit later about PTSD, because back in the day it didn't exist. What you did was you had to gather with your friends and just drink to try and mask all that pain, and there was also that camaraderie because you're doing it with people who know exactly what you're going through. What about uncovering dirty cops?
I've written pretty openly about a couple of those. I was never working in the internal affairs area. I came across some things. And I remember I spoke with a detective sergeant who I could trust, and something had happened, and I was out having a beer with him and said, "Look, mate, I need to do something about this." This is after I'd left undercover, and he said, "All right, you can go to internal investigations, but you're not going to be completely 100% aware of who you're talking to and who they know. Mm-hmm. If it goes badly," he used much more Anglo-Saxon language than this, but if it goes badly, you could come home and potentially find the garage of your unit full of stolen TVs or half an ounce of heroin in your bedside drawer. And you will come home and people will be waiting with a search warrant, and then you are stuffed.
Or even worse, if you are a copper that turns whistleblower, you could end up being shot like Michael Drury was by Christopher Dale Flannery, Mr. Rent-A-Kill, because he was about to blow the whistle on Roger Rogerson and other police corruption in Melbourne, and he was shot.
Yeah, I knew Mick actually. I met him before he was shot. Yeah.
Shot through his kitchen window in his house in Chatswood.
Yeah, well, he was feeding his little girl. And that's a whole, Jesus, that whole world of Sydney it made the corruption in Queensland look like kindergarten children. And then the corruption in Queensland was bad enough. And you're right, it was, if you'd blown the whistle on corruption in those days, it was, as an undercover cop, quite possible that your identity would be quickly disclosed to the bad guys. And that way the bad guys could do the job of a corrupt detective. So we walked a really fine line, and I've used the analogy often that it's like water finding its own level.
Yeah.
We found other honest police that we could trust.
Yeah.
And we avoided as best we could those we couldn't trust. But
But the ones that you couldn't trust were probably great actors as well, and you probably didn't know.
Oh no, we knew. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yep. we could tell. You could tell by some observations. You could also, Larry and I think it's in my first book. I'm pretty sure it's in my first book, where I wrote about Larry and I had finished an undercover job in North Queensland. And we had a police club in those days, which was a licensed bar that only cops or people who were signed in could get into. And we shouldn't have done it, but we went up there to have a few beers. We just wanted to be surrounded by normal cops again, I think.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there having a couple of beers or a few more than a couple, having a few by ourselves. And we were approached by some detectives who came over and surrounded us. And we thought initially it was, good job, boys, how you doing? And very, very quickly the conversation was, listen, you two, next time you're in the field, we've got a lot of heroin and we want you two to move it and we'll split the profits 50-50. And that was when I looked at Larry and he looked at me, and I remember thinking, I just have lost so much faith in my naive belief that everyone was doing this job for the same reasons we were. And I talked my way out of it and, just said, oh, look, it's too risky or something. And they didn't really have much to do with us after that. But the very fact that they were so open and blasé about having a conversation about selling heroin.
But they could have been testing you.
No. These guys were, there were some other things they'd been up to. So
you talk about how you started as an idealist and you ended up being a massive cynic. Was that the beginning of that?
Oh, it probably was one of the major factors, I guess. Cynicism and the whole jaded approach comes with most cops, I think, Luke. I think you're so disappointed by humans. You're so disappointed by what people can do to each other, how much they can turn on each other. And in the police culture as well, I saw, particularly later in my career, a bit of a tall poppy syndrome. And if you didn't fit a template, then I won't say you're ostracized, but you were sort of pushed to one side or judged or whatever by those who, and the template I mean, the short sleeve, bad tie, drinking detective attitude that was prevalent amongst a lot of people, not all of them. There were some bloody good detectives and good operators, but just that little cohort. And so I was disappointed by that. I was, just witnessing the world, I suppose, mate. And I think the best descriptor would be just world weary. That's why a lot of cops do tend to associate with only other cops, because they get each other, and it's a trap. That contributes to mental health issues and emotional issues. There's a moral injury as well. There's a whole conversation around that.
You talk about the dangers of losing your anonymity and having your cover blown. There's a story, and I'd love you to tell it if you could. My understanding, tell me if I've got this wrong, you're probably in a beer garden again or at a bar, and you're trying to convince the people you're meeting that, you're a crook as well. And the guy pouring your beer recognised you from school, even though you had the long hair and the mo. Tell us that story.
Yeah, I was in Cairns with that job with Larry, and occasionally we'd be sent away as a pair, I suppose, to give each other support and backup. So we'd met a target accidentally. So again, we'd be given a list of targets to try and get close to and work on, and we'd meet them in pubs or play pool and start conversations, or however we did it, or sometimes we had an informant.
This is the psychopath that you talk about.
Yeah.
And you didn't have Google back then, or you didn't have the resources, so you couldn't do a background check on this bloke. Sorry, but keep going. Yes.
Yeah, exactly right. And we found out at the end of the operation that he was an escaped double murderer from the Adler prison in South Australia.
South Australia.
At the time, he and I were getting on fabulously. And we bought drugs from him. And that's the thing, you form these false relationships. And even though he was someone I would never associate with in my wildest dreams, normally, you just do. And so we'd go out and have beers and we'd laugh together and we'd smoke some dope and he'd sell us drugs and all of that stuff. So it was in a nightclub in Cairns.
Right.
And the nightclub I'd been to once before, I think. So anyway, we're in there, decided to go out. We took the target out with us, and You know, we're all standing at the bar, and the barman came over, and I recognised him immediately. It was someone that I hadn't seen since year 9, when I went to school in Cairns High, and I was a pretty shy little kid. You know, I had the short back and sides and the Brill cream, and and I was a bit chubby and insecure and all of that. And I thought, hell, I'll never know who I am. And I'd grown my hair, and I had grown a beard for this operation again. And he walked up and looked at me and said, "Hey, Keith." And I wasn't using the name Keith. I was using the name Jim. And in that split second, and people have said to me, "Have you worried about having your cover blown by crooks, by police?" Yeah, you do. But by far the biggest threat is people who know you, either family or relatives or mates. They're the ones that will just automatically go, "Hey, how you going?"
Yeah.
I just used a bit of salty language back at him and told him he had the wrong bloke and so on. And just, get me my effing drinks and, piss off and leave us alone. And I remember turning and looking to the target, and he was looking at me with what I can only describe as Charles Manson eyes. Just those
dead eyes.
Dead, black, soulless, evil eyes. And I found out later why that was. He was a psychopathic murderer. Jesus. And for some reason, it just chilled me to the bone. And I thought, woof, And he said, he called you Keith. I said, he's an idiot. Don't worry about him. The rest of the night was, a few drinks, bit of a chat, but the environment had changed. And he kept looking at me. And I'm thinking, Jesus. So
he was as cunning as a shithouse.
Oh, yeah.
As a shithouse rat.
Yeah, absolutely. Very affable guy, apart from the whole homicide thing.
But you could see him turn and his eyes go evil black.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because he was right on to me. So the only thing I could do is I went back into the club the next afternoon and asked to speak to the manager, who was Brett. And I told him exactly what I was up to and what had happened. Not knowing this guy was a murderer at that stage, but I just thought he was a major drug dealer. And I said, "So, mate, I want to bring him back in, but I want you to play along with me." So we went back in maybe 2 nights later, and Brett came over and apologised profusely. So, "I'm so sorry, you look like the guy I went to school with. I'm completely wrong, blah, blah, blah." Made a big deal of us and gave us free drinks all night. And then that fed the ego of this target. And he just turned back to being, okay. Because the cover that Larry and I were using was not that I was a drug dealer, that I was a journalist, a freelance journo. And Larry was my photographer. And we were up there doing a piece on the emerging tourist scene around the Cairns, Kuranda, which it was in those days. And my story was that I'd inherited, $100,000 or something. And I was too lazy to work to make it legitimate. I wanted to turn the money around quickly. And that was, like flies to a honeypot, bees to a honeypot with drug dealers. And the irony of that whole conversation is that when the operation closed and it was discovered who he was, he admitted to the investigating detectives that he was planning to kill me for my money. And I was planning to have him arrested for the drugs. So, and I remember thinking, and I thought we were mates.
But it brings me to the next question, because you say that it's your biggest fear, having your cover blown, and you've got to have a plan B.
Yep. And that's the thing about hypervigilance. You become incredibly hypervigilant. You're always thinking 3 moves ahead. And that's a talent or skill, I suppose, or a habit that stays with you for the rest of your life. You're always thinking 3 moves ahead. So something as silly as, if I'm driving in traffic these days and I'm going over the speed limit, which I tend sometimes to do, let's be honest, I'll have an excuse in my mind already. If the cops stop me, I've got an excuse, even though it's not necessary, or something will happen in a work environment. I've got an excuse. It's a bizarre habit to have, but in an undercover world, it can be life-saving.
Of course, but you said a little while ago that there was no training. So how did you train? How did you learn? Were you able to talk to other undercover cops with more experience and learn from them, or did you all sort of feed off each other, swap stories, swap anecdotes? This is what's happened. How would you have handled it? Is that the training you had?
Yeah, that was it. That's exactly it. So there were at that stage, I think, 5 of us, and we were all around, 22 to 25 maybe. think the oldest might have been almost 25 and a half.
Kids.
Yeah, we were kids, yeah. And when we were able to get together, so, you know, whoever, often we're on operations outside the Brisbane area, so the Gold Coast, Cairns and Mount Isa, over the border sometimes when we weren't supposed to be. Whenever we could get together, we would, and we'd sit in somebody's unit and we'd have a drink, or we'd roll a joint, and then we'd role play, and we'd just go, okay, this happened to me, right? Now, what would you do? And we learnt from each other, really.
Yeah.
And we developed a real bond in this brotherhood that was completely different to any other police camaraderie that you'd expect. We really had a brotherhood, and we trusted each other implicitly. They were the only other people I trusted, actually, in those days.
Keith Banks is with me, author, and was in another life an undercover cop, pinching baddies, mostly drug dealers. And I want to get on to mental health in just a second, but please, if you could, indulge me. Tell me the story about the Vietnam vet and the Jellic night.
Much later in my career. I finished undercover. I'd gone to the criminal investigation branch. Then I went to special weapon or tactical response, tactical operations in New South Wales. Did all of that, and then I transferred back to the major crime squad. And in the major crime squad, I was running a couple of undercover operations. And so I'd been out on a Saturday, and this is a great story about the unpredictability of policing. I'd been out on a Saturday morning to meet a covert operative that I'd been controlling, got the exhibits, did some debriefing, etc., and making our way back into police headquarters to knock off. So I think it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, somewhere around there. And my colleague and I were in a plain car, and I dressed down. Every excuse I could, I wouldn't wear a tie. So, you know, I was meeting an undercover guy, so I'm wearing jeans and a polo shirt, and I was a bit rebellious. My hair was always longer than it should have been. And we had an any unit call, any unit responder shots fired in the centre of the city. So, as you do, we raced in there. I jumped out of the car and took some tactical control. That had been my background, so formed it in a cordon, moved the media out of the way and whatever, and ran up the stairs. And there were a few police in the foyer of the MLC building,
right,
which in those days was a bit of a landmark in Brisbane. And I can't remember how many. There might have been half a dozen cops inside, some outside, etc. And there was a sergeant, a uniformed sergeant. And as I ran up, gun in hand, I said, "Right, where is this prick?" And he sort of just looked at me and indicated around the corner and said, "She's just around there." And I had an immediate thought when I was responding about the Hoddle Street massacre in Melbourne, where people had been murdered, the Strathfield massacre in Sydney, the Queen Street massacre in Melbourne, and again, long before, these all happened before firearm regulation. So my first thought was, shit, we've got shots fired in this building. There's going to be a potential massacre. I'll go in, and if I have to, I'm going to engage him and kill him. So I'd been in a gun battle a few years before, and in my tactical world, I'd sort of, been trained very highly. So raced in there, popped around the corner to have a look, and this guy was sitting there with a rifle across his lap and a cardboard box and army webbing. And I just did a quick sneak and peek and, took a bead and then drew back again and just started talking, as you do. I'd seen negotiators work. I wasn't a trained negotiator, but I knew how they worked. And he just said, put the effing gun down or I'll blow the whole place up. So for whatever reason, something I vowed I'd never do, I handed my firearm to the uniformed guy and took a couple of steps in and then spent an hour and a half talking to this fellow. And his story was that he was a Vietnam veteran. He'd come back from Vietnam and, like many of them, lost his marriage, went from job to job, had a drinking problem, met someone else, had a child with her, and he had gone into the MLC office, which was an insurance company and superannuation company, and he'd asked to cash his superannuation in because he was falling behind with child support payments. And again, he used some pretty Anglo-Saxon language to describe the guy, but he said this guy just laughed at him and said, "Oh, if you cash in whatever you've got, you'll have to pay us fees and you'll be left, you'll owe us money," and laughed at him. That was the point. And he, and Frank was he was overweight. He had a long black beard. He looked unkempt. He went home to where he was living, went out and got on the gas that night, handed his dog tags to a barmaid that he knew, and then came home and dug up 15 and a half sticks of gelignite.
Jesus.
And made an IED, so a bomb.
Yes.
Then he jumped on a trail bike, strapped a rifle across his back and his army webbing, which I found out later contained a hand grenade, and rode into the MLC building, fired shots, and to get the security guard out, and intended to blow the place up. So I sat with him and eventually talked him out of it all. But the thing that struck me was, at that stage, I was going through what I know now as PTSD. And it's called a disorder. It's a disorder. It's an injury, but it becomes a disorder when it affects your life for more than 2 months. I'd been struggling with this for 6 years. And as I was talking to him, trying to find some common ground, and it's a bit of a long story, Luke, and shameless marketing plug. People can read about it in
the book.
In my book. There was some funny stuff that happened, as you know, but it was really about trying to say anything I could to him to make him feel wanted and to create a bond between the two of us. A lot of, and I'm not saying he's psychopathic, quite far from it. He was damaged, poor bugger. But, often you will see victims of crime, if they can form a relationship with their predator, they're less likely to be killed because the predator sees them as being human, not just a target. What I was trying to do with Frank was form a bond so that he could see that it was he and I against the rest of the world. And I just made it up as I went along, believe me. But as we were talking, and he started to tell me about his Vietnam service and what had happened, he was what was called an assault pioneer. So those guys in combat are the ones who are trained to blow up bridges, to go down tunnels, to blow things up. And so he knew what he was doing. And I'd been bomb trained, so I was a qualified bomb technician by that stage. And I looked at what he had in this cardboard carton, and there were 15 sticks of gelignite, all wired with 3 electronic detonators to a 12-volt battery, which it was a goer. And when I say 15 and a half sticks, when I first started talking to him, I said, "So what do you got in the carton, Frank?" And he pulled a half a stick out and tossed it to me, and I fortunately caught it. And it was sweating gelignite through the wrapper. So it's unstable gelignite, which meant that...
Oh, God.
Potentially...
He threw it at you.
Yeah, I tossed it to me. And potentially, if you dropped it on the floor, it could have exploded. So there we were, and again, the unpredictability of police work. I was on my way back to the office, and here I am sitting with a guy who had the opportunity, I had the means, and the opportunity to kill both of us as soon as it crossed his mind. So talked him into handing me the rifle, talked him into, potentially leaving with me, and we went through what he was going through. And he talked about nightmares, he talked about drinking, he talked about the anger that he felt, and he was going up and down all the time. And I remember thinking, Jesus, this is what I'm feeling. Because you said it at the beginning of the interview, PTSD was unheard of in those days. And I thought I was struggling by myself. I just thought after a gun battle I'd been in where a friend of mine was killed, I went through all of this, and I just thought, I knew I had some problems, but I just thought it was me, not understanding or knowing that it's so bloody common. And as Frank was telling me everything, I had this realization of, shit, that's what I'm feeling. So we got to the stage where I was about, I thought I had him and we were going to leave, and then he pulled the hand grenade out and removed the pin and said, "That's it, I'm just going to detonate this, get out." And I knew that if I'd even been able to run out of where I was, the hand grenade fuses around 3 to 5 seconds. So had that thing gone off, it would have sympathetically detonated the entire device, which meant I was going to die anyway. So I just looked him in the eye and said, "Mate, I've got enough nightmares and I'm not going to let you be another one." And after, I don't know, seemed like an hour, it was probably more 30 seconds, he put the pin back in and handed me the grenade, and I was able to talk him out after that.
I totally relate to what you're saying. And this is about you, not about me, but just for your information, I'm an ambassador for a charity called Wounded Heroes.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm aware of them. Yeah.
Martin Shaw.
Yep.
And we look after vets who have come back with problems between their ears. And we have some Vietnam vets actually on our books that we look after, but it just never ceases to amaze me. Basically, we try and give financial and psychiatric help and whatever help is needed to men and women who have served overseas and have come back without any support. And it also, I found out through my association with Wounded Heroes, that being in the ADF, it's the only job, government or non-government, where you don't get work cover. So it's just, I totally relate to what you're saying. I wonder, interesting, because you said when you were going to the MLC Centre, you were prepared to run up the stairs and kill this bloke if needed. And I often wonder, and I hope that wonderful police officer, Amy Scott, who killed the Bondi stabber, I don't even want to, John Couchy was his name, but I don't even want to mention the prick's name. But Amy Scott, who was in Bondi doing bar regulatory work, looking for underage drinkers, responsible service of alcohol, just on a routine check. She's called into the Westfield and her life changed forever. And incredibly brave. She's saved, I don't know how many people, but you do worry that people like Amy Scott are getting the help that she needs. I don't know her. I don't know if she needs the help, but wow. I mean, fancy having a job where you leave for work in the morning and you might not come home. That's
exactly right. I mean, we've got a recent event of a senior connie in Tasmania being shot and killed when he was out serving a warrant, a normal warrant, the course of events. And Amy did a fantastic job. But ironically, well, not ironically, maybe the wrong word, but the very next day, a Queensland police officer shot and killed a knife-wielding offender as well. And Amy's incredible act was given massive coverage, as well it should be. And yet this other person did the same thing the next day, and it was almost verging on criticism in the media. And I think the media have a hell of a lot of responsibility for the narrative that is painted on these situations. If Amy had confronted an offender armed with an edged weapon, and there hadn't been the Westfield deaths and stabbings, it is likely the media may have made some comment like, why wasn't he shot in the leg? Why didn't she have a taser? Was it necessary? But because it was clearly in the public eye, the narrative is different, and so it bloody should be. But you have a lot of police who confront people with edged weapons and shoot and kill them, and they're almost judged in the media. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the detective that tasered the elderly woman in Cooma didn't help.
Oh, that was, I can't make comment on that. I do. But I'm more about edged weapons, mate. I'm more about, the fact that someone armed with a knife can take you out very, very quickly.
Okay, let me ask you this then. I am digressing, but I've got you here. Too. So one of the people killed that terrible day was a security guard from Pakistan who'd only just started the job. Wasn't trained, wasn't ready for this. Should security guards be better trained? Should they be able to carry non-lethal weapons, a baton, pepper spray, a taser, and should they be wearing knife-proof or bulletproof vests? Had that security guard been able to drop that bloke with a taser or with pepper spray, how many lives would have been saved, I wonder? I'm just putting it out there because you're an expert.
That's a really good question. I do some consultancy now in the risk area, and I do work for a couple of clients in that field. I made a recommendation recently for stab-proof vests to be issued to security officers in a particular area. But now the thing is, stab-proof vest, absolutely. I would, in my view, anybody's providing security anywhere now, they should, as a minimum, have a stab resistance. Nothing's ever stab-proof. A stab-resistant vest. Now, the issue of batons.
Non-lethal weapons. Non-lethal weapons. Should security guards have them?
It depends completely on where they're deployed, I would think. Now, also, a taser doesn't work every time. A taser is not 100% effective. Neither is spray. I've sprayed people in a tactical situation and I'm talking sieges and high-risk raids, that has had no effect on them.
But it's better than having nothing, isn't it?
Yeah, true. I mean, there's a whole conversation going on now about, I think in Western Australia, the issue or the supply of pepper spray to civilians is being legalised. So it's a whole other Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Look, I think from a risk perspective, a security officer should be equipped with anything that makes their workplace safe.
Chubb's security guards have guns, but there's an argument there that also makes them a target for crooks who want to steal their guns.
Yeah, which happened a lot. Yeah, back in the old days of armoured car robberies, often what would happen is that the firearms would be stolen and then they're in the possession of crooks. Yeah, the whole thing about armed security officers is a different conversation. You know, it's you really have to be highly trained in the use of firearms, I think. And from personal experience, pointing and squeezing the trigger and shooting a human being is not as easy as it seems to be, or it could potentially be. You know, it's one of the hardest things that you can do in life. So from a non-lethal perspective, yeah, I think that, and I think you will see now that there would be risk assessments being conducted across Westfields and across retail areas with that consideration in mind.
It's a debate worth having. Because I don't know whether you know this, but one of my former employers was John Singleton.
No, I didn't know.
When I worked at 2GB.
Yep.
And
of course,
tragically, it was his daughter, Dawn, was one of those getting ready for her wedding.
Mm.
And Singo was vehemently against the inquiry into all of this. And I had to be, and I am being respectful, but I disagree with Singo on this because there had to be an inquiry to try and make sure this doesn't happen again.
Oh, that's the purpose of an inquest, mate. Yeah, you can't not have an inquest into a situation like that. And inquest is not about blame placing. An inquest is about looking at what occurred and, as you say, putting in measures to do the best you can to ensure it doesn't happen again. You never eliminate risk, but you can certainly minimise it. I think it's a question that needs to be debated, discussed, and I think it needs to be discussed from an expert opinion perspective, and not, you know, a lot of people jump on these bandwagons who have no knowledge about the area. But for me, if I'm providing personnel, I don't, but if I were providing personnel to an area where they were required to take out or undertake security duties, I would want to make sure they were equipped. For that to happen, I think there needs to be a legislative change for it to occur. I think from memory, security officers are only allowed to carry non-lethals if they're in a particular area, and that's governed by legislation. So there's a whole raft of conversation that has to happen around it.
You know, since Port Arthur and the gun legislation, John Howard's gun legislation, at the moment, and we've seen recently, and look, it's before courts, it does involve a juvenile. We may never know who they are, but there was a stabbing at a party at a house recently. But the knife crime in Sydney and Melbourne is just rife. Should police officers have the power to search somebody and see if they've actually got a knife concealed without a decent reason? One of the arguments against it is, they could be profiling people from a certain ethnical background or an age group or someone who wears a certain style of clothing. I think if you've got any reasonable doubt, you should be able to search someone for a weapon. What do you think? Because the civil libertarians are up in arms about this.
Very quick and concise answer, yes. Police do not have enough powers to search. And you're right, there is so much risk aversion by those in command of policing now. They're too concerned about criticism. Now, for me, if the knife crime is out of control in Melbourne, I live in Melbourne these days, it is out of control. The police don't have sufficient power. They need the power to do it because then it becomes a situation, it's similar to the broken shutter theory in New York City.
New York City, yeah. Giuliani. It becomes a situation where if you're carrying a weapon in public and you know the cops can stop you at any time, maybe you'll rethink it. At the moment, they know, juvenile criminals and adult offenders know that the police have very little power, so they flaunt it. Then you've got to combine that with the bail laws and action and consequence. Another whole thing we could spend an hour discussing. But yeah, I don't think police powers are sufficient at all. When you spent 3 short years as an undercover, but a long time in the police force. But just getting back to the undercover thing, and you've seen the very, very worst in people. And at a very young age, you had to not only be an Academy Award-winning actor, neither on steroids. God, I love that. And we talked about how you went from being an idealist to a cynic. Have you lost your trust in mankind?
Oh, gee, that's a good question. No one's asked me that one before. Bang, well done. I think for a time, yes. Yeah. When I was in the middle of all my darkness, I think for a time I had lost faith in a lot of people, a lot of mankind. It's really now at this stage of my life, particularly since I was diagnosed and I've found how to get through that morass. I've got more faith in people. I think I think the majority of people are genuinely nice, trying to do the right thing people. I think there's a percentage of people who probably need to be dealt with much more harshly than they are. But I think the average person's got their heart in the right place. I just, sometimes they're misinformed and sometimes they'll make commentary around things they don't know about. But I've got it back.
Okay, but this is my next question. Even now, after all this time, when you meet somebody, or if you're out socially, do you still try and read them?
I think that's just an instinctive thing, yeah. I am noted for being quite sociable these days as well. I'll meet people and I'm quite happy to have a chat with them and get to know them, but I'll also be sussing them out, yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Have you sussed me out yet?
Oh, I'd like to meet you in person, and I'd do a bit more, but yeah, I have.
Now I'm shitting myself. I don't want to meet you in person. You'll work out all my deep dark secrets just from body language.
Conversely, mate, you may work out some of mine as well.
I had an amazing conversation with Mark Ainsworth about juvenile crime, and maybe on another date, if you want to come back and do another chat with me, maybe I can have you and Mark on at the same time. We can talk about juvenile crime and your thoughts on it.
Sure,
Can we do that down the track?
Yeah. I know Mark. So, yeah.
I want to get back to your advocacy for dealing with PTSD. We mentioned Vietnam vets and I mentioned wounded heroes. Your expertise is with the police force. And I mentioned, first responders that must have terrible trouble getting to sleep when they've seen horrific things that ordinary people like me wouldn't even want to dream about. How do we go about addressing this? I remember my pop, this is my grandfather, he survived World War I, Villers-Bretonneux.
Wow.
Survived, was blown up. His whole battalion was blown up. 6 people survived and they called themselves the Fragments because they had shrapnel all through them.
Yeah.
But he came back a broken man and would wake up in the middle of the night, Mum tells me, screaming and yelling and just a broken man. And back then everyone said, shell shock.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
Toughen up. Have a spoon of cement and toughen up. That doesn't cut it anymore. It needs to be addressed. This is my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Look, there's a whole, gee whiz, this is a whole conversation again, Luke. There is an epidemic, an unrecorded epidemic of suicides amongst particularly former police across this country. And the data is not captured. If you're ADF and you resign from the army or retire and you commit suicide, then it's captured in a data set. That's why the ADF the Royal Commission into Defence Deaths had such traction, because they had data. I know right off the top of my head, 6 of my friends who committed suicide after they left the police over the last 12 years. And it's not, that's just my cohort. It's not captured anywhere. And there needs to be a commission of inquiry into law enforcement or police suicides, both current and former, but also that needs to be expanded to paramedics and fireys. Now, I have done work with Fire Rescue Victoria here, or I'm about to do some more work with them later in the year, and I talk about my journey through post-traumatic stress disorder, the organisational errors and mistakes, and how you can prepare your mental fitness Yeah, and your emotional resilience, and you're not born with resilience. Resilience is like you almost have to be broken in order to develop resilience. That's what happens in life.
Yes.
And on the counter of it, people will claim that they're all stressed and they have trauma and blah blah blah, and sometimes that's just Tuesday in the real world. But those who do struggle with ongoing trauma, whether it be individual or vicarious, there needs to be unquestioned support. So let me give you a hypothetical.
Yep.
Let's say a police service, force, department. I quite like the word force, but I'm old-fashioned. So a police force has a support system in place for you, Luke, as a police officer.
Yes.
You've gone through some shit and you're struggling, and they go, okay, Luke, you can come forward and you can put your hand up and we'll give you help. The reality is you won't do it. And you won't do it because there's still an unspoken attitude that, this guy, Luke, he actually, so say, for instance, you apply for a promotional panel and you sit before the panel, you answer all the questions, you're the candidate. When you leave the room, they'll go, that bloke, he's a bit, he's got some dramas. What do you mean?
He's a bit soft.
He put his hand up for mental health support.
He's a bit fragile and he's a bit soft, yeah.
Or he's got a bit of mental health troubles, and that still happens. So what that means is that the average cop goes outside and they seek their own support, they pay for it themselves, and they don't go through a work cover.
Or worse, they self-medicate.
Or worst case scenario, it all gets too much for them and they go and sign their firearm out and kill themselves. Now, if you look at a number of police suicides, and this is a raw conversation to have, a number of police suicides, particularly over the last decade, have occurred at work. And the reason cops kill themselves at work is they want to make a statement. They know that their mates are going to have to come and find them, and that's horrible, but they kill themselves in the office because they just can't face it anymore, rather than do it at home, rather than do it somewhere else. And that both saddens me and alarms me, because I don't see things progressing as quickly as they should. So the Americans do it really well. The Yanks wrap their arms around cops who are struggling. They wrap their arms around them and they look after them. We still have that bloody Australian attitude of, well, even though we don't say it anymore, but I'm going to give you an example in a minute, and I'll be very careful how I say it because I don't want the person identified. But there's still that attitude about, hey, this is the job, toughen up, mate. I had a visit to the Fire Rescue Academy a couple of weeks ago in Melbourne. They are completely the opposite. And it really warmed my heart to watch how genuine they are about the welfare of their fireys. Because the fireys, and particularly in the rescue component, are dragging people out of cars and beheaded, decapitated people and so on. They really, really look after them. A situation occurred in this country, and I'm going to be very careful how I say it. A situation occurred in this country that was horrible from a police law enforcement perspective. One of those involved, who was incredibly traumatized, was told, quote unquote, you need to get over this and move on. Now, and I'm not saying anything that's going to identify it, as I keep saying, but it was horrible. And for that comment to be made to an operational cop is abysmal. The impact on that person's mental health and recovery is insurmountable, almost insurmountable. That person has a lot more resilience than people have given them credit for. And I'm speaking in riddles, but and often in my experience, these comments are made by people who've never seen an angry man, as we used to call it. In other words, have probably not been on the road and not been operational, not being confronted by life-threatening events. And it's easy for them to sit in an office environment where they've been promoted to a certain rank, well beyond their ability, the old Peter principle, and make these comments. Or they can be the type that I mentioned earlier in the interview, the old style detective who used to, Bluey, and drink a lot of beers and talk about how good they were, and then condemn others for a reaction. So that attitude the culture has to change from the top. and it has to be jumped all over.
So I've worked with, alongside with, and spoken on this podcast to a mate of mine, Gus Wallen, who looks after Gotcha for Life.
Right.
And there are plenty of agencies out there, but it's just making that initial contact to say, I need help. I'm not coping. And you just said it a little while ago. It's making that first step and admitting that you're struggling a bit, you need some help, and worried sick that you're going to be judged.
Yeah, I think, you know what the answer is, mate? The answer is to have people like me or others or whoever, not necessarily me, but people talking to recruit classes at the academy and saying, okay, this is what this job may entail. If it does, this is what has worked for me, or this is what I think you should consider. And have that cultural change about an openness and discussion about mental health from day one. I had coffee with a young cop, he's 25, here in Victoria last year. He'd read my books or something, it doesn't matter. But anyway, he contacted me through social media. You know, I'd love to have a coffee with you and meet you. And I said, sure. So I went and had a coffee with him. Impressive young man. And he'd been in the job, I think, for 3 years and had been in 4 critical incidents already. And critical incidents are life-threatening. And I said, so, mate, how are you going? One of the first questions I ask is how it's going. How are you? How's it going for you? How are you feeling? And he said, mate, I surf. He said, so I'll have a shit day at work. I'll jump in my car, I'll drive to a beach and I'll surf. And then when I come out, if I don't feel cleansed emotionally, I'll go back in again. And I said, that is gold, because you're already identifying what you can do from an exercise or a mindfulness perspective to release some serotonin and to take your mind off that and just, you know, you don't have to sit in an orange robe and look at the sunrise and chant to be mindful. But you know, and I said, what you're doing is gold, mate. I can't give you any advice. God, I wish, you know, you'd given me that advice if the situation were reversed.
He sounds like a very old 25-year-old, which is great. His parents must be very proud.
His father was in the job. So
there you are.
His dad was in the job, and his dad's told him things that he's learned through trial and error.
Keith, I really desperately want to talk to you again. There's so much. There's so much. I got to say, just in recent times, we all here in Australia got to witness firsthand the most unbelievable undercover police work in the inquiry and the final arrest of that monster, Brett Peter Cowan, who murdered Daniel Morecambe. And the way the police gently and carefully coerced him into believing that they were something that they weren't, and finally getting an arrest, that was fascinating. You must have watched that and thought, wow.
Yeah, I did. I just thought that was brilliant. And the I can't remember the name of the Australian movie that was influenced by that job, but it's called The Stranger, I think. I'm not sure. But the portrayal of the undercover is brilliant in that. It's just, I looked at that and thought, wow. Joel Edgerton plays the part of the undercover cop, and he does it magnificently. That whole job was testament to the use of undercover techniques where traditional methods fail. And covert policing now has come leaps and bounds from when I was doing it. And you're right, mate. I looked at it. I researched it. I bet you did. I bet you did. I'm fortunate enough to still be in a network where I can talk to people and get some feedback about things that the average person doesn't hear, if you get my drift. So I spoke to people about it and just, wow, it's something I would have loved to have been involved in some way, shape or form.
But you've got to be a NIDA on steroids actor. Because if you blow it, you've blown it. The movie was called The Stranger, 2022, Joel Edgerton. You're spot on, Sean Harris. Well done.
Thanks. It's just made I'd love to meet Joel one of these days because I'd like to shake his hand because he portrayed that fantastically, and the undercovers are the unsung heroes of that operation because we'll never know their names, as it should be.
Yeah. But they used to give you up, didn't they? When you had to give evidence, didn't they give you up?
Yeah. After every operation in my day, your identity was disclosed, your real name, not an assumed one.
That?
Oh, Wild West days.
That is the name of your next book.
The Wild West.
and I want a credit on the back sleeve.
I'll get back to you.
Yeah,
I think,
your
look,
people will talk to my people.
I think the next book, Luke, will be about other people's stories. I want to write about the unsung heroes.
You're an excellent writer.
Oh, thank you.
You're a great communicator. I've already felt like I knew you before we started this chat, and I've got to say, I'd love to talk to you again if we could.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, for sure.
What's your message for the day?
My message for the day is twofold. Next time you see a police car, don't automatically think they're writing a traffic ticket. Try to have some understanding of the fact that they may have just come from a tragedy. They may have experienced something that you never will. And they are the line between us and chaos, So have a little bit of respect for the cops. The second thing is, if you personally are struggling, and you don't need to be in a gunfight to have trauma, you don't need to have been a first responder to have trauma. If you're personally struggling, find someone you trust and ask them if you can have 5 minutes of their time and be honest and vulnerable with them. If you're the person that someone comes to, give them 5 minutes of your time and then shut up and don't try to solve their problems. Just be somewhere they can listen to. And that's where it all starts. Yeah, that's a way to healing.
Keith Banks, you've got to read the books, Drugs, Guns and Lies, and Gun to the Head, with more to come. And they're screaming out for a screenplay. So maybe Joel Egerton can play you, hey?
Well, I'll tell you what, if the options are open, so, let's use your massive network and grab Joel and tell him to have a talk.
Done. My network, it's the producer of this podcast, Kelsey the Millennial. We'll find him and we'll get you two kids together.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's a really easy conversation to have with you, Luke. And yeah, mate, I feel like I know you very well now. So thanks for the opportunity.
And as usual, Truckee Tuesday with Rocket Rod Hannafy.
Got your diesel running. Head out on the highway, missing all the roadkill. Another Truckee Tuesday. Indicate when you're changing from lanes. Do not brake check me in my prime.
It's time to hit the highway with Rocket Man, Rocket Rod Reddy, the king of the highway, and world-renowned and respected road safety advocate. He joins me now with a dog in the background. Rocket Rod, you're at home, are you, in Dubbo?
Yes, mate, yes, home visiting. Off tomorrow, got home yesterday, cleaned the skid plate and the turntable, preloaded, and I'll be off to Melbourne tomorrow.
What sort of dog is that? Hang on, let me have a listen. I'm going to have a guess, okay? Okay? Because I'm a dog whisperer. Okay, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
It's a high-pitched... Oh...
Jack Russell for sure.
Kelsey's going Jack Russell. I'm going to go Kelpie.
Oh, no, go bigger.
German Shepherd.
No.
Border Collie.
Well, in the same realm, no. Closer to the Shepherd. Sit down, you.
Border
Blue
Collie.
Heeler.
No, bigger.
Blue Heeler's
Great
Kelpie.
Dane. Great Dane.
No, he's not as big as that.
No. Well, the other one's a cross for the Great Dane.
Okay.
No,
Golden Retriever.
Okay,
It
actually...
starts with R.
No, shush. Don't tell us. Our listeners are going to listen to this dog, and I'm going to get them to write in, and we'll come up with a prize if someone can correctly guess the sex, the breed.
Oh, and on that, people, Rod, you'll be happy about this too. We are seriously on the move to make Bonafide T-shirts and a special Truckee edition T-shirt, which Rod, you and I will chat about that later. We're finally getting that on the road and moving. But we're also looking into getting stubby holders and trucking caps.
Excellent.
Truckee caps.
Truckee caps. But
Truckee caps.
are they good, or would you rather a bucket hat, or what? Tell us what you guys would actually want, and we'll make them actually look pretty and not shit.
Yeah, blue singlets.
Yes, blue singlets. That's the go. I still have them, mate. I think I only own one white one.
Okay, what Truckee merchandise do you want the millennial to go out and manufacture? Let us know, and we'll come up with a prize for whoever gets it right, whatever Kelsey and Rod Hannafy decide on. Yeah. Okay, Rod, some really big news. Finally, the state and federal governments have come together and they've found a lot of money, $3.3 billion, that was based on 80-20 funding arrangements. It's now going to $6.7 billion. It's the state annual Bruce Highway funding commitment, and it's going to go through until probably 2034. And as I say, it's a jointly funded boost of $883 million. It was introduced specifically to target upgrades to various sections of this terrible piece of road that is used so often and is often the scene of some terrible, terrible accidents. Now, Rod, I'll tell you this. They're looking at 130 new bridges, 66 new upgraded rest areas, 582 kilometres of roadside safety barriers, 72 township entry treatments, whatever that means, 255 kilometre wide centre line treatments to try and stop head-on crashes, 100 new overtaking lanes, 211 protected right-hand turns, 73 kilometres of highway duplication, and 8 flood immunity upgrade projects. It's all going ahead. My question is this. Obviously, it needs it. And you and I have spoken for many, many years about the terrible condition that this highway is in. But because it floods so regularly, are these upgrades going to last?
And it does depend on how they do it. So one of the things I've been concerned about, I suppose the other thing is we are talking about the Bruce Highway. You didn't actually mention it. A lot of people would have known, I'm sure, because it is really the longest individual state highway. You've got the Newell, of course, goes through 3 states. You've got the Pacific goes through mostly New South and up. You've got the Hume goes through 2. Yes, you've got the Air Highway running across to WA, but it doesn't carry the volume of traffic that the Bruce does. So the feds promised this up last year, as before the election. They've gone ahead and committed it, and I'm sure that the figures you're quoting there, one is state, one is federal, so it's still a lot of money to be done. There have been a lot of deaths, but, and look, only last weekend I did write to the Queensland Minister. You're probably aware that they have a Bruce Highway Task Force. This was convened before that money was announced, and so they were aware that there was a problem and work needed doing. One of the fellows who is on that Bruce Highway Task Force is a fellow by the name of Ken Wilson. He operates a Facebook page called Truck Friendly. He's certainly given much promotion to the green reflectors, and he also promotes having a sticker on the back of your caravan that says Truck Friendly. Means that you understand a little bit of some of our needs, that you consider having a UHF. And as I say, he's certainly promoted the green reflector marking of informal truck bays on that and got really good feedback from the caravanning fraternity. He did ask the question very early on, are these sites, the green reflector sites, only for trucks? And whilst they've been designed with the intent of providing somewhere for truckies when there is nowhere, there is no reason another vehicle can't stop in them for whether it's feeding a crying baby or a sick child or having a pee, whatever it might be. We don't care who uses them as long as they don't pull up in them and go to bed or do something silly like that. So, mate, that's really good that they've announced it. You said 66 new and upgraded rest areas. The one thing I put in my letter to the Minister last week was that they need to do an audit of what's currently there, and then you find the gaps. And in those gaps, hopefully, is where they're going to put some of those new rest areas to fill those gaps, because it doesn't matter what you're driving, and it doesn't really matter the time of day. We know that fatigue can come on people at any time, and if you are at that point of tiredness, you need to stop and there's nowhere to stop, your only alternative is to keep going, and that's no good for anybody.
All right, well, you know, we're talking about a 15-year duration with all of this, and if my observation of government projects is being correct over the years, it'll probably blow out to 30 years, but it's money well spent, is it?
It is. It's overdue. It's good that they're going ahead with it. Look, there was a hell of a lot of work being done there at one stage, and people were getting frustrated with the roadworks. And I've got to say, Luke, last week I travelled out of Newcastle to Mackay. Now, coming into Mackay, I think I was down to my last 10 minutes because there must have been at least there was at least 10 sets of roadworks, 2 of which were signed roadworks where there was no one there. So you slow down, do the right thing, and then there's no one there, and you think, well, why did I slow down? I did get a message from a bloke during the week. There used to be a campaign, I don't know whether you ever saw the ad, Luke, was where a fellow was sitting at a chair, at a desk, and virtually a car drove straight through beside him at 60 kilometres an hour. And it said that's what it's like being a road worker when people won't slow down. And you and I have discussed, we don't want any road workers killed. We recognise they're there to fix the road for us, to keep us safe. But it must be a two-way street. It must be that, as an example, just west of Dubbo, they're doing roadworks on a side road, Luke. So the side road is closed. Now, you could not turn that corner from the main highway, which is a 110 kilometre limit, into that corner at probably more than 40 kilometres an hour safely in any type of vehicle. So even if you're slowing down to turn, the signs are there saying the road's closed, you're aware of it, but they have all of the highway traffic slowing to 60 kilometres an hour for about 100 metres either side. Now, people look at that and they say, what a crock, and why am I slowing down when they're not even working on the road? And until we sort that problem and it works for both, you will have people doing the wrong thing and you'll have the road workers saying that we've got to slow you down even more, and I fear that that will make it worse. But we've got to find the compromise that works best for their safety, and so that people recognise, someone's working, I will slow down, and that's what we want people to do.
The 255 kilometre wide centre line treatments, am I correct? Is that where they put the wire barriers between? No. Okay.
No.
Educate
the wide
me.
centre line. Okay. I used to write that if you are travelling on a highway with just a centre line of paint between you and the oncoming traffic, you have a closing speed of 200 kilometres an hour, 100 for each vehicle, right?
100 coming one way, 100 going the other.
Exactly right. And between you, you have 20 centimetres of white paint. Now, I've said that's not enough between you at that speed. What they do with the wide centre line marking, they put in 2 white lines with a gap between them. Depends on where you are, what state you're in. Sometimes they have the audible marking as well, so the little bumps. And the intent is that should you, through any reason, you blinked, you turned the radio, you looked at the sky, and you veer across that single centre line, you are then in a line of oncoming traffic. If you have a wide centre line and you veer across one line, if the audible stuff's there, it says to you, oi, look back at the road, make sure you know where you are, and you can just turn back into your lane very gently, whereas in the past you crossed it, someone hit you coming the other way. So the wide centre line virtually just makes that a wide gap between the 2 lanes of traffic. The thing is, in some places where they put it, it means that there's little shoulder left to use because the road wasn't wide enough in the first place. But as long as they widen the shoulders, so that should someone still come across those 2 lines, you can veer onto the left shoulder. If you see a roo jumping, you can veer a little bit to the left with safety. The other thing is, most roads now, Luke, are supposed to be designed with a 10-metre clear runoff zone. So, again, you go to sleep, you go off the left-hand side of the road. Instead of hitting a tree a foot off the road, there is supposed to be a clear zone that allows you to run off there safely. Now, roads are meant to be designed for people to use. And here's a funny fact, Luke. If we never drove on any of them, they'd probably last forever, except the weeds that eventually come through. So they are designed to be used, but they have to be built properly and they have to be maintained properly for the vehicles that use them, whether they're cars or trucks.
Okay. Well, let's watch and wait and see what the budget ends up being and how long it actually takes. But hopefully money well spent. As I say, a joint financial effort between the federal and state governments. Now, Rod, here is a story out of Tasmania, and I'd like your opinion. It's the story of a Tasmanian roadhouse owner who is concerned that a decision by the Department of State Growth to place no stopping signs outside his business is going to have a negative impact on the number of truck drivers who stop there. It's the Sidmouth, Sidmouth, the Sidmouth Roadhouse and General Store. It's located beside the Batman Highway in northern Tasmania. The Batman Highway connects the eastern and western sides of the rich Tamar Valley and is busy with trucks and other traffic. Your thoughts?
Mate, this has happened before. The Caltex at Singleton, the BP at Gatton, the McDonald's at Musselbrook. All of these places where we've discussed we cannot get good quality food. We cannot find a place to stop and use a toilet because there's no toilets in the rest areas. We have access to places in service stations, but then during peak hour, 9 million cars go out and decide to go shopping and we can't even get a park in a service centre to use a toilet. Now, I understand people look for things to do. They've got to justify their job and they say, oh, there's been one incident here where someone walked across the road to access the facilities, or, oh goodness me, there was a little pothole, so instead of fixing the pothole, let's put up a great big set of no standing signs and stop people parking here. The facilities are not there now. If they continue to go and put up these signs and take away more facilities, they can't do that, Luke. They can't do it unless they provide suitable facilities. And simply putting up no standing signs is like putting a Band-Aid when you've chopped the end of your foot off.
Well, it's happening everywhere, but this is a story out of Tasmania, and I thought you'd have some thoughts on all of this. Here's something interesting.
Mate, I know a lady who is involved in the Tasmanian Trucking Association, and I will follow up with her, and I will get a report from her next week whether they've been consulted and what their consideration is as well.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to the owner of that truck stop. So let's see what we can come up with. Kelsey will find him. Here's an interesting story. According to the boss of Hino, the Australian president and CEO is Richard Emery. He says that electric trucks are here to stay. Hybrid trucks. He was speaking at a trucking media gathering in Darwin recently, and he has suggested that Hino's success with the 300 series could lead to a hybrid 700 series. He says, quote, diesel powertrains in trucks will remain the preeminent solution in the Australian trucking industry beyond 2030. He said, we believe hybrid electric will remain the only high-volume, lower-emission truck in Australia for over the next decade. Your thoughts?
Mate, the other alternative that we've discussed is hydrogen, and the facilities and the infrastructure there is simply not there to support hydrogen. We've discussed one of the servos was putting in some car charging points. It'll be interesting to see how they go with truck charging points. That's obviously going to be the next thing. But for city trucks, for your garbage trucks that work one shift during the day and park up during the night, for local delivery trucks that do the same, that run around town, electric and hybrid electric may well be a suitable solution. Line haul, it's just not there yet, and as he said, he said, 2030 diesel will still be there, and we doesn't mean that everybody gives up and we just keep going with diesel as it is. There's no reason they shouldn't keep refining and defining and improving it, and that's certainly what Cummins and other engine manufacturers are aiming to do, along with looking with the hybrid stuff. And the fact that they are putting the effort into it, obviously, you talk to some people. And Luke, our trucks here now, we're coming to Euro 6. I think Euro 6 comes in next year, and that will be virtually the exhaust coming out of the trucks is cleaner than the air going into them. And in some places in the States, that's what it's like. We as a country, look, we're very large and diverse, and I don't think we are destroying the world. There are certainly places with lots more cars and trucks that are doing a lot more damage than we are. It doesn't mean we don't have to do our part. But for some things it will work. For line haul, it'll still be diesel, but we always hope that they're going to come up with something that is cleaner and greener. The one thing, Luke, is that every time this comes up, and as I say, they brought in Euro 5 and Euro 6, it's made the cost of operating the trucks dearer. They either use more fuel or they run a lot hotter, which means the fan runs more, which means you use more fuel. We had DPFs, diesel particulate filters. Now, I've just had to have one replaced on the truck. $3,500 every 3 years. And yes, the exhaust is cleaner, but that's another cost to the industry. Running AdBlue for those trucks that are selective catalytic converters. That's another cost to industry that nobody wants to pay us for. That's got to be considered.
God, remember the AdBlue shortage that we went through a few years ago?
Yes. And I actually put in a complaint to a servo. Now, AdBlue, do you know what AdBlue is, Luke?
It's fertiliser.
It's urea and water. So, there's a fair bit of the stuff about. It's not technically difficult to make. And yes, it does have a shelf life. But I pulled into a servo the other day, and during that shortage you spoke of, there were places charging up to $5 a litre, and they were ripping everybody off. And I pulled into a servo the other day, and they still had it for $2.99 a litre. And I said, what's the go with the AdBlue? Oh, it's got nothing to do with us. It's the company that owns the sites. And I said, well, I want you to lodge a complaint for me, because that's ripping people off. It doesn't cost that much to produce and deliver it. No one else is charging that amount. And, of course, because it's something else, you don't really look at that initially. You're putting 1,000 litres of diesel in and 100 litres of AdBlue, and perhaps you don't look at the AdBlue price, but someone is ripping people off, and that's just another cost that makes everything dearer unnecessarily.
Now, we've got a voice message from Kyle. Let's have a listen.
Hey, Luke and Rod Hannafy. I got a question for you, Rod. Why in Victoria do we have the NHVR and the police doing compliance checks? Isn't it a bit of a waste to have the police doing compliance checks when they could be out actually monitoring cars, speeding, all that sort of jazz? I've just gone through the Yark Way Bridge. Police were there doing compliance checks, but the NHVR up the road travelling through Yark, not even worried about it. So why do we have the police opening the weighbridge doing compliance checks and the NHVR not worried about it?
Good on you, Kyle. Thank you for leaving a voice message. Rod?
Mate, we've had this exact same question a number of times, probably about a month ago. I've said, Australia, and in WA, police do not stop heavy vehicles except for speeding and traffic offences. Their system operates under OH&S, and that's monitored by the OH&S department over there. We have said the same thing. Why is it? The police make too much money out of us. Now, there are good policemen and bad policemen, the same as there are good truckies and bad truckies. Some of them have a fixation on us because something happened. They target us because the truck's big. You've only got to go right round the 32 tyres to find one that's got a scuff out of it. You've only got, 50 lights on the thing, and you get one light that's out, they can knock you off. Now, those things individually don't affect safety, but the police can say, well, we went out, we knocked off all these trucks, and we've argued in any blitz they have, and when they have a blitz, mate, at one stage I think there was 10 police vehicles coming out of Melbourne at the Broadford Weighbridge. They were pulling every single truck in there and going through you like a dose of salts. Now, the public look at that and they think, oh, geez, these truckies must be bad. The coppers are all going through them. They will then put out a press release that says, we stopped so many trucks and we got so many offences. Now, we've asked, what are they? They won't tell you. They will say that there was a couple of load restraint and there was a couple of fatigue. Now, is the fatigue because the bloke drove 10 minutes too far to find a toilet?
Yeah.
And is the mechanical breach because one tyre had a scuff out of it the size of your thumbnail? Now, if they are honest and genuine and they release that information and they say, well, we had this many offences and this was the major thing we found, then the industry will say, okay, I'm aware of that now. I will keep that in mind. I will make sure that we are compliant. I will do everything in my power to do it. But when they just come out, they will not tell you often how many trucks. So if they pull up 100 trucks and found 50 defects and they were all bad tyres that were bald, right, we've got to do that. That's an industry problem we must address. But if they pulled up 700 trucks and they got 10 offences and 2 of them were one tail light out and one bit of tyre, and it's just, we've got to make it sound that it's important enough to justify us being paid all this overtime and all these coppers on the side of the road to pull up all these trucks just to annoy the shit out of us. And that's how sometimes we see it, and that's how it does happen. If they were there to improve road safety, instead of to find up and come up with, we got so many tickets, that would be better for every single person that drives on the roads. And we'd think it was a fairer system as well.
Okay, Miss Millennial has got some questions for you.
Yes. Hello, Rod. Hello. So
Hello, my dear.
I put the message out there to everyone and also my group of friends as well, what questions they had about trucks and truck drivers and the industry. And I actually surprisingly had a lot of questions. Now, reading through these, I think you're going to find them to be not silly questions, but questions that you might find obvious. But let's just ask them anyway. So this is one from Jordan. Do they eat takeaway every meal when they are working, or do they have little cookers and fridges in the cabin to bring food home?
A bit of both. A lot of people now carry more food. I carry yogurt, I carry biscuits, I carry milk, I carry cereal. Occasionally I'll make a sandwich. I do have some heat-up meals. So, yes, a lot more trucks now have microwaves in them. And I'm sure that you've seen that you can buy meals. Some people have really loving wives that will, when they cook up during the week at home, all the leftovers get frozen and stuck into containers, and the truckie takes them away. So it does vary, but it is hard. And you can imagine, years ago, the only place you could stop at Moree was at Macca's. So they went and put all nice trees up the main street so you can't park anything bigger than a car there now, which whilst I don't condone eating that stuff, and anybody who's read the book Super Size Me know that how good it is for your long-term health.
Well, you know that was debunked. Super Size Me.
Actually, didn't he die?
No, the guy. He didn't die. No. But the guy was found to like the metrics and everything that he was using. Like it was found to be like completely like not based in science. But anyway,
I think story for another day.
The point stands.
Okay, next.
No, wait. I actually just have a question off the back of that.
Yeah.
What's the most annoying thing to eat in a truck? Like, okay, let's just say, your wife's packed you something and you open it and you go, oh, God, this is going to be so challenging to eat.
When you're stopped, now I have a bit of rag. I sit a bit of rag on my lap if I'm eating, and I do like chocolate, I've got to say. So now I put a little thing. If I'm having a Freddo frog or something like that, I put a bit of rag on my lap so it doesn't go on my seat or get in my pants, because otherwise you drop a bit of chocolate, then you lean on it and it squashes into your seat. If you've got having a meal, same thing, put it on my lap. When I'm having a bicky, put it on my lap, and then I just flick it out so that I'm done. The thing is, if you bought a pie, like again, you people buy pies and you can eat it down the road and the hot thing comes out the side. That's unsafe.
But
that's
some servos
dangerous doing that.
But what about the traveller pie, which is the longer one?
Yeah.
It's designed to eat in the car.
I'm surprised there
should be more.
Well, I'm surprised there haven't been more of those stories. I remember ages ago there was that story that woman that sued Macca's because her coffee was too hot.
The coffee was too hot, spilled
I'm
it in her lap.
surprised there haven't been more of those from truck drivers.
Yeah, but listen to me. That is why the Chico roll was invented, with its own little paper sleeve, and it was invented so you could watch sport, particularly the races.
Well, yeah, not get your hands dirty.
That's why the Chico roll was invented.
Yeah, sausage roll's not too bad, but and of course the other thing with the coffee, and you'll have to go on to Yeti to sponsor us, Luke, and put in some Truckee Tuesday Yeti cups. They'd be a really good giveaway. There's a thing for you.
Good.
And look, they are good. They're sealable. They do hold the heat. If you buy a foam cup, you squeeze it and you wear it. It's all that sort of stuff. It is up to the driver to have half a brain again. So we'll have to put on it, for sale, common sense. That we'll make a fortune out of that, Luke. But meals, it is getting harder. And if you look at anybody's long-term health and you do one trip in your car with your family, you buy takeaway, it's not going to kill you. For us, if you have to live on it 6 days a week, we are going to have more obese, unfat, dangerous truck drivers in the long term because we can't access decent food on the road. And the servos have something to answer to.
I remember years ago when he was Premier of New South Wales, Bob Carr, and his government banned the sale of sausage rolls at school canteens. And his words were, quote, "Why would you give your children fat, cooked in fat, wrapped in fat?"
Yeah. Are you guys legally allowed to eat whilst you're driving?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Look, there was a big thing years ago, so I'm sure that you know what the new phone laws are, and I think there's new phone laws in Queensland we'll have to cover. Victoria, of course, have got a lot harsher on it. And, mate, I only saw a car the other day following him down the road, backwards and forwards, got the phone out. And because of the cameras, they now put it on their lap. In the past, they used to hold it up. Now, because the cameras, they put it in their lap and they're looking from the road to their lap and the road to their lap. And anybody doing that, mate, deserves to have their phone taken off and run over them. That's what they should do. The problem with that is that then where do you define what is either distracted driving because you took a bite of your pie and then, landed on your lap, or you spilt your coffee in your lap, and something else that is looking at a video on your bloody radio because you weren't watching the road. And I'm sure I've mentioned it. I saw one night travelling down the Hume Highway in the rain, car beside me. As he went past, I looked down into the car. The bloke's got his light on and he's reading a book. Not even a picture book. He's reading a book on his lap. And I called up and I said, is there any police on channel? Now, 3 blokes attacked me and said, why are you dobbing him in? I said, because I don't want him to run into your wife coming the other way and kill her.
Yeah. Do you know what? This could be a discussion for another day. It's only a matter of time, I reckon, that smoking whilst driving a car will be illegal. I mean, if it's deemed to be unsafe to use a phone, surely it's unsafe to be negotiating a hot lit cigarette that could fall down in your lap and make you drive off the road. If it's dangerous to use a mobile phone, why isn't it dangerous to smoke?
Well, I think because you can smoke without having to look. You're not looking at the cigarette.
Yeah, you're gonna search for your smokes. You'll look for your lighter.
I feel like for lots of people, it's second nature. Anyway, we digress. Just one last point on that. I reckon Mum would be a brilliant truck driver because she is the only person I've seen that's been able to drive a manual vehicle whilst eating like takeaway with chopsticks.
With chopsticks?
With chopsticks.
My God, that scares me.
Yeah.
Look,
she puts,
really?
She puts it in between her legs and she's got the chopsticks in her hand.
No way.
Yeah, and it was banana blossom, the salads, the little Asian salads. No accidents. I don't think she's ever had anything against her driving record.
That's unbelievable. I'll tell you something else about Kelsey's mum. You know the barbecue chickens you get, like at Coles or whatever? And
yes.
And they're in the little plastic bag. Me and Adam McDonald, we call it the bachelor handbag. Mm-hmm. Well, the best part of a barbecue chicken is the parson's nose, correct?
Parsons.
Parsons.
Isn't it parcels?
No, it's the parson's nose.
It was parcels.
It's called the parson's nose. It's the arse.
Yeah, I know. It's
the little triangle. That is the best bit. And we fight over it. And every time Nikki comes back from Coles with the barbecue chicken,
the butt's gone.
The parson's nose is missing and her steering wheel is greasy.
Yes. Yeah, always.
Yes. Occasionally I do buy one if I'm stuck somewhere, but it's not the sort of thing to eat driving along.
No.
And look, imagine, how am I going to park my B-double out the front of a supermarket to go in and get one? That's the next problem we've discussed so regularly, because it's just not considered that there should be at least one bay. Now, I had a win at Narrabri many, many years ago. It was one of the few places we could access a supermarket on the Newell. I got onto the council after they took away all the street parking. They built a piece for us at the end. But then 2 or 3 blokes went in, stirred up the dust, and we lost that. But we do have a bay, which is signed truck parking only, 15 minutes, and they don't police it in case you take 20 minutes while you pick out your fruit and stuff you want to make a sandwich with. And something like that at other sites would be a boon to us as long as our blokes do the right thing, grab the shopping, and then move down the road to eat or do whatever they want to do.
Next one.
And we'll try and do this rapid fire. So what's the most boring thing to listen to on the road?
Billy Ray Cyrus.
No. People doing talkback where they go,
Could never be you, Luke.
No.
Never be you. What's the worst drive they have done or that they have to do?
What, the worst piece of road?
Yeah, the worst drive.
What's the worst trip?
Yeah.
What's your nightmare trip?
Or like, is there something that you have to do as part of the job that you just hate?
No, but let's ask the first bit. What's every truckie's nightmare trip?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think it depends on start. So the other night I had got the truck serviced, had to run around at the last minute, get loaded and get going. And it's leaving when you're all stressed up. Like it's if tomorrow I've got plenty of time, I'll go shopping, I'll leave at my own time, I'm all organised. When everything works against you, but you still have a deadline or a plan or, geez, I've got to get going because if I don't get going, and as it was the other night, I drove through till about 12:15. I was getting tired, but I sort of had to be far enough down the road to think what happens next day, because otherwise you stop half an hour earlier, the next day you lose a whole trip. So I think it's the trip you leave where things have worked against you and you're starting behind the eight ball. And I think that's always the worst way to start. And hopefully it gets better from there, but you know what it's like. Sometimes it doesn't,
No. Okay, do they get paid extra after a certain time for driving overnight like shift workers do, or is it a flat rate for a trip?
Generally, there are two pay systems. Well, there's three really. There is what's called trip money. So let's say you get paid to run from Brisbane to Sydney and it will be a set fee. And that doesn't matter how much you work at either end. Then you can get paid a kilometre rate, which means you get paid for the kilometres. Now, some companies say, from Brisbane to Sydney, it's 876.124 kilometres, and that's all we're going to pay you. Other companies pay you the kilometres that you travel, but then you should be paid, if you're getting paid kilometre rate, you should be paid hourly rate for loading and unloading or delays. And then, of course, there's what everybody else does, and that's getting paid an hourly rate. And yes, if you are on an award that includes hourly rate, once you exceed your base 8 hours, you should go on to time and a half, double time. There are very few truck drivers that get paid hourly rate. It's always been an argument. If we pay drivers hourly rate, they're going to go and park on the side of the road and have a kip, and they're going to charge us for it because that's how long it took to do the day. The argument from the other side is, if you're paying trucks by the kilometre, the more kilometres they travel, therefore the more driving they do, the faster they go, the more they earn. And there's got to be a balance in the middle, and it depends on whether you're getting paid correctly. And that's where a lot of overseas drivers are getting coerced into driving for very cheap rates, and they're told, well, if you don't do it, you haven't got a job.
Yeah.
And that's being used against many overseas people, and that's got to be stopped.
Yeah. All right. Is their cabin truck theirs all the time and they change the loads on the back of the truck, or do all the drivers share trucks if they work for a company?
Same thing. Some companies have a one truck, one driver policy. That might apply just to the truck. You keep the truck and you change trailers occasionally. My system is I have that truck, nobody else drives it. I tow a set of trailers most of the time. They're mine. I'm responsible for them. Some companies have it where you do changeovers and you might get out of one truck, swap your bag and get into the other truck, go back the other way. You'll keep that truck and take it home, but then it might get used during the day by local. And others just have, right, you get into truck number 1 today and away you go, and tomorrow you're in truck 3 and truck 5 and truck 7. The system depends on the operation.
Yeah.
Generally, if you have a one truck, one driver policy, well, that truck can only work as many hours as the driver, but the driver looks after it. He treats it better. He respects it. He knows when something goes wrong because he knows the truck. That's right. And I live in that truck 5 or 6 days a week. Therefore, I treat it as my home and I respect it. Not everybody does, but it depends on the operation. And if it's got a sleeper cab, then you can have a sleep in it. If it doesn't have a sleeper cab and you're stuck on the side of the road, then you're buggered because you can't sleep.
Yeah, that sucks. Okay, I've got 2 more.
2 more.
What's the bougiest brand of truck you can drive?
The what?
Bougiest.
Bougiest? What's that?
Oh, like...
Flash.
Do you know what bougie means?
Flash. Sexy? Flash?
Yeah, flash.
What's the flashest truck? Use our language, not your millennial language, please, for Christ's sake.
You knew what that meant, didn't you?
No.
I had the intent. Yes, I had the intent. Haven't heard the term, but had the intent. Look, it's like anything. You can get an Isuzu which is, a base little truck that can be all set up with bells and whistles and a really nice paint job and look flash, or you can buy a $500,000 Kenworth that's called a poverty pack that has just the absolute base on it, and you're given it and told,
$500,000.
go and drive up and down the road and do this. Yeah, exactly, that's right, yes. And then you can customise owner-drivers who buy their own, they maintain it. They tend to have better looking trucks because it's theirs and they want it to look theirs. Company trucks tend to be, well, we buy 10 of these, just make them all look the same. We want them to look the same because that's our corporate image. And then you've got all the bits and pieces in between. So my truck has been painted specially for me. It has all different accessories, most of which I've supplied and put on. And you go from buying it out of the factory as it is and putting it to work to some people spending, mate, the truck that won at the Brisbane Truck Show was a brand new truck, bought off the floor. Let's say it was $450,000. I'm not that far out. They bought it off the floor and pulled it apart.
Oh.
A brand new truck. Bought it off the floor, waited 2 years to get it, pulled it apart and started rebuilding it.
Wow.
And did so many things that most people wouldn't see, but it was important to them. It has all these little subtle touches and finishes, and it won the truck of the show at the Brisbane Truck Show. Now, anybody would be proud to drive it. In one way, you'd be scared to drive the bloody thing because you wouldn't want a stone chip on it. But that's the level of commitment and dedication and, I've got to say, passion from some people.
Yeah. Is it feasible to, if you're an owner driver and you've spent, $500,000 on a truck or whatever, surely how feasible is it to pay that loan off though? Is it on a truck driver's wage? How long would it take to pay that off? Is it worth it? If you're good with money, I guess.
You've got to remember, we're only talking about the truck. We're not even talking about trailers. We're talking about $500,000 for the prime mover. Then you go and buy a set of fridge vans or tankers, something that's a bit specialised. You're getting close to probably another $700,000 or $800,000, and then you've got to earn that money. Now, that's where some people have really good understanding of their costs. They know what they have to charge to survive. And I've got to say, I only just got a text, saw on Facebook this morning, another company has gone into liquidation.
Oh.
I won't mention it because it's only on Facebook, so I don't have any guarantee that that is correct. But we are seeing enormous rising costs. You're looking at, of course, what's happening with fuel at the moment, with the trouble in the Middle East and where that's going to end up. You've got registration. You've got impact from maintenance. Look, let's go back to right where we started, the Bruce Highway. Yeah. Now, we've had trucks that normally you get so many Ks out of tyres, so many Ks out of shockies. You might have to, we do an A service every 10,000. So an A is a visual inspection, check the oil, the water, the brakes, adjust them, make sure everything's fine, and away you go. Then you've got a B service. On mine, that's done at 40,000 kilometre intervals, so that's changed the oil, and then a C service is 100,000. Now, we are copping so many broken shock absorbers, nuts and bolts coming loose, chassis being damaged, cross members coming loose, trailer parts falling apart because now the roads are in such a state and not being repaired as they should that instead of me driving down, let's say, 100 kilometres of highway where there might be one dip or one pothole, in that 100 kilometres, there's now 50 potholes and 50 dips, and that just multiplies the impact into the vehicle. It certainly multiplies the impact back into the road. For every action, there must be an equal and opposite reaction. So if the roads are built up to a standard and maintained it, they last longer, the road lasts longer, the surface is better, the maintenance is reduced. At the moment, the maintenance cost is going through the roof in transport because the roads are not being maintained. And when you're in your car, it's a bugger. Oh, look, there's a bump. Oh, I'll swerve to miss that one. Oh, there's another one. I'll swerve to miss that one. You do 20,000 kilometres in your car. It's not really, unless you hit a bad pothole and blow a tyre and wreck your rim, it's not going to wear it out.
Yeah.
We do 200,000 kilometres a year average, some more, some less. And that means I'm doing 4,000 to 5,000 kilometres every single week.
Wow.
And if that level of maintenance increases by 10%, whereas at the moment I reckon it's probably 20 to 30, then that's additional cost to deliver all of those items to everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not being recognised, Luke.
And that cost increase is going to be passed on to the consumer.
Which they don't want to pay.
I've just got one more question, and I think this speaks to like a lot of the misconceptions about truck drivers. Someone asked, I'd like to know if it's true if they all take drugs on the roads.
Mate, look, years ago, and let's say 20 years ago, they used to take ephedrine. And you'd go to your doctor, you'd get Midi-Slim because you took it to keep yourself awake. I've got to say, a lot of drivers still smoke because that's what they do with their hands, and they drive along and they have a smoke and it keeps them awake. Getting good food, maintaining your body, that's got harder. We've discussed all of that. Our view, and I've got to say, there was a scientific paper released some years ago, and it quoted the fact that people who were drug addicts had that view you just put forward, that truckies take drugs. So they were coming to the industry saying, I can take drugs and drive up and down the road. Now, in most of the drug testing that I'm aware of that's been done on our industry, and as a perfect example, there was a big blitz here in Dubbo a little while ago. They pulled up 700 trucks. They got 3 truck drivers on drugs, and we don't condone it. You should not be taking drugs to stay awake. You need to operate safely. And in the years gone by when you bought ephedrine, it was a pharmaceutical medication. Yes, it affected your sleeping pattern. But when that got outlawed, because somebody said you blokes shouldn't be taking drugs, then some truck drivers went to amphetamines because they keep you awake.
Yeah.
But they could be made up by some kid in the kitchen. They're dearer, they're dangerous. They should not be used on the road, whether you're a truck driver or a car driver. But the problem is now with car drivers. And in that test, when they had 3 truck drivers out of 700, they caught 5 car drivers. Now, how many car drivers do you think they pulled up during a truck blitz? Pick a figure.
I have no idea.
None.
The only ones they only pulled up, but they had a 40k zone operating. So the coppers were there as well. And if you were stupid enough to drive into the 40k zone at 60, they would pull you up, they would fine you for speeding, and they would drug test you. Now, they stopped 20, I think, or 40 cars it might have been. They had 5 car drivers out of 40 that were then charged with a drug driving offence. And we had 3 truck drivers out of 700, and there was a hullabaloo. Now, who do you think is the problem?
That doesn't surprise me.
That is really interesting. All right, Rod, look, interesting stuff again. Thank you so much. Thank you for our listeners' feedback. Thank you, Miss Millennial. What was your word for the day?
Bougie.
Boozy.
Bougie with a J. Bougie.
There you go, even worse. Look, I've got to say I did have a couple of calls during the week from drivers saying, love what we're doing on the podcast, keep up the good work. That was really nice to hear. I'm still getting a few who don't know about it, so I'm educating as we go along. And, mate, look, I thank you for the chance to get the word out because, as you said, Kelsey, so many people have a misrepresentation of our job. I'd love to. Now, Luke, the people that did our promo song, I want you to get
Sean
in contact
Carmody.
with them to see if that. Yes. And look, I heard from his nephew, I think, but I don't have a direct contact with him. I want them to write us a song. Now, you won't get on to Jimmy Barnes for me. Geez, I don't know. The things I've got to chase you up on. You won't get
He
Jimmy
was in
for
hospital.
me.
He had a heart attack, for Christ's sake.
No, but he's healthy now. He's out back on the road. And I know he's a busy man and he's a top bloke. And I've read all his books, so I certainly recommend his audio books.
Let's see if we can get him on again.
We need to get on
surely.
to them.
What about Jimmy Barnes driving wheels? Or what about Cole Chisel shipping steel? Shipping steel.
That's right. But we need Sean to make us a song that shows people what we do. Now, Kelsey, did you get anybody that said, look, I really notice trucks and I'd rather be on the road with trucks than car drivers?
No.
Some taxi drivers even, in conversation, will say, I would rather share the road with trucks than cars. because we don't teach car drivers how to share the road with trucks, and truckies are there and they're professional and they've got to get the job done and they want to get home safely. But we need a song, Luke, to promote the industry, and we've got to chase it up. Because
Sean and Kim Bell, they'll do that for sure.
Millennial, you got
exactly
homework.
Right.
Yeah,
Chase Sean.
Can I just say, I was driving home to the city the other day, and I was going through like a, Mossman area, like it's just really cramped.
Oh, that's
like,
bougie.
Yeah, that's bougie.
That's bougie.
There's like 3 lanes, and they're really small lanes, and the lanes change, and it's blah, 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 blah. And of course, that area, the road's always packed, right? And there was a truck coming up, and like we were kind of like in the similar area, kind of stuck in traffic at the same time. This truck driver, he was clearly in a rush of some description. Not that he was being dangerous or anything, but like you could tell he was trying to move past like the slow cars and the cars that were just doing annoying stuff. So when I kind of like, at one point I caught up to him and he got behind me for a second and he was trying to come in front of me, and I like made it a point to just like stop and like slow down and give him the space to come through. And he stuck his hand out the window and went, thank you.
Gave you the thank you wave.
Yeah, gave me the thank you wave. And I felt very privileged.
That's all you want.
I was like, all good, buddy. You do your job, you get to where you need to go.
Fancy that, a truckie in Mossman. All right, well, listen, the merchandise, just a reminder, folks, we've got a budget, a small budget, and Kelsey wants T-shirts and caps and all sorts of things. What would you wear? What would you proudly wear regularly? T-shirts are no good because caps are better. They wear caps longer.
Yeah, okay, well, caps then.
And what was the coffee cup thing?
Yetis.
All right. Millennial and our marketing team has some marketing team.
So, yeah,
Kelsey.
just me. Yeah.
Kelsey has some homework to do. Right, Hannify, we will catch up again soon. Please leave your feedback, lukebonerradioguy@gmail.com. Leave us plenty of voice messages because we do love them and we use them. And to the bougie lot out there,
onwards and upwards.
Safe travelling and keep on trucking.
That's it.
Hey, listen, thank you so much for listening. Again, please spread the word, like, share, tell your friends, tell your enemies. Just tell everyone. And if you want to leave a voice message, please do. It's in the description. It's easy to do. And please send us your emails. Keep them rolling in. Luke Boner, Radio Guy @gmail.com. And you can follow our progress also on our Facebook page, Luke Boner, that Radio Guy. Thank you, Linesman. Thank you, Ball Boys. Thank you, Millennial.